Chapter 359. Li Mu and Zhang Chun walked out of the Imperial Ancestral Temple and left the Imperial Palace together. Zhang Chun was silent for a long time before he suddenly asked, "Li Mu, did you grow up in Yangqiu County?" Li Mu was thinking about something else, so he asked casually, "Why are you asking this?" Zhang Chun waved his hand and said, "I'm just asking. By the way, why do you think King Shou is so good to you?" Li Mu shook his head and said, "Who knows?" Li Mu couldn't think of a reason why King Shou would always give them pointers at critical moments. Maybe he was just doing it for justice. After all, human nature was complicated, and you can't label a person as good or evil just because of their background or faction. Regardless of the reason, King Shou's words did make Li Mu suddenly see the light. What does the continuation of the Great Zhou rely on? It's not the imperial court, not the imperial family, but the people. It's the psyche power of the people. What the imperial court is most afraid of is losing the people's hearts. They may not care about a city, but they won't care about a county, 10 counties, or even 36 counties. The law of the Great Zhou is to protect the weak in the people, but this is only on the surface. The existence of the law is to maintain the rule of the imperial court. Because only when the people live and work in peace can the psyche power be continuously produced, the emperor's qi can be nurtured, and the upper realm powerhouses of the imperial family can be endlessly produced, ensuring the stability of the country. No matter how fierce the imperial court is, the prosperity of the Great Zhou will always be the goal of everyone. King Shou's words can be said to have awakened the people in the dream. Li Mu walked out of the imperial palace. Unexpectedly, there were already many people outside the imperial palace. Seeing Li Mu walk out, they immediately surrounded him. "Lord Li, how is it? His Majesty didn't punish you, right?" Lord Li was too impulsive. "You shouldn't have fought with that person. Isn't this dirtying your hands?" Feeling the concern of the people, Li Mu smiled and said, "Everyone, don't worry. His Majesty is a righteous person. How could he punish me?" A man breathed a sigh of relief and said with a smile, "That's good, that's good. Lord Li is worthy of being His Majesty's favorite minister. If I knew this would happen, I would have hit him harder. Break his legs. This kind of treacherous person, it's not too much. Lord Li's family, he will die a horrible death." Among the crowd, the Lord Li Mu, Lord Li is Lord Li E, Lord Li was Li is? The crowd also looked at Li Mu. With a profound look in his eyes, Li Mu said, "Official Li E is the role model of our generation." "I know. Lord is brave. Lord Li died. S. Li Li's house. Even now we still can't take it lying down." The crowd was filled with righteous indignation as they spoke one after another. At this moment, the man bit his lip and suddenly looked at Li Mu. He said, "My lord, can you save Lord Li's daughter? She's Lord Li's only child left in this world. Stop talking." The middle-aged man glared at him and said in a deep voice, "Do you want to kill, sir?" Sighs could be heard from the crowd. Yes, Lord Li was the enemy of all the nobles back then. Now those people are in high positions. Lord Li, it's best not to provoke them. "Forget it. Lord Li, you can go ahead. You can't follow in Lord Li's footsteps." The man's eyes were filled with tears. He choked and said, "If it wasn't for Lord Li, my family would have died in Fairy's capital. I can't watch Lord Li die." His voice was mournful. The people around Li Mu lowered their heads. Their eyes were filled with suppressed anger. Lord Li had served the people wholeheartedly, but his family was ruined and his descendants were about to die. On the other hand, those who had framed him had become heroes, enjoying endless glory and wealth, riding on the heads of the common people and abusing them. They could do nothing about it except feel indignant. A man of 7 feet could not help but sob in front of everyone on the streets of Fairy's capital. No one laughed. Everyone's mood was very heavy. The man lowered his head. As he sobbed and trembled, a pair of hands landed gently on his shoulders. Li Mu patted him on the shoulder and said, "Don't worry. Lord Li won't die. He won't be wronged forever." The man raised his head and said in shock, "Lord Li? Lord Li? Lord Li?" The people looked at Li Mu. They seemed to have realized something. Their eyes were filled with excitement. Li residence. When Li Mu walked through the door, Hyun Jinko and Yu Zhenzi in the courtyard sensed something strange. Hyun Jinko turned to look. The moment Li Mu stepped into the courtyard, he felt as if the world was pressing down on him. This was a force. It was a force that should not exist on a fourth realm cultivator. Yu Zhenzi said in disbelief, "His psychokinesis has already formed a force. No wonder his cultivation progress is so fast. Very few people can complete psychokinesis cultivation." Li Mu retracted his newly acquired psychokinesis back into his body. Lu Hanyan walked over quickly and asked, "How is it?" Li Mu shook his head and said, "She's safe for now. But to save her we have to think about it carefully." Lu Hanyan thought for a moment and asked, "Can't we ask Her Majesty to pardon her?" Li Mu said, "It's not that easy. But it's okay. Her Majesty has already agreed to let me reinvestigate Lord Li Yi's case. After Lord Li's case is overturned, things will be much simpler. Actually, he only begged the Empress today to show her his attitude. This case involved too many people. Whether Li Mu proposed it or the Empress ordered it, they would definitely encounter great resistance." Back then, Li Yi offended the rich and powerful. Among them were the Shao royal family and the Zhou clan. They indirectly contributed to the massacre of the Li clan. Of course, they would not let Li Mu reinvestigate the old case so easily. Therefore Li Mu needed help. Help that even the great Zhou court could not ignore. He walked into the courtyard and said, "Senior brother Hyun Jinko, there's something I need your help with." Hyun Jinko said, "Junior brother, there's no harm in asking. You're welcome." Li Mu thought for a moment and said, "I might need you to return to Mount Bayun and meet senior brother sect master personally, Ministry of Justice." In the assistant minister's office, the right assistant minister of personnel looked at Zhou Zhong and asked with a frown, "That Li clan survivor was taken away by the imperial clan temple. Why didn't you stop them?" Zhou Zhong asked, "The official documents of the Secretariat have Her Majesty's imperial seal on them. Who would dare to stop them?" Gao Hong stroked the short beard on his chin and asked in confusion, "But why did the Secretariat want to transfer her to the imperial clan temple?" Zhou Zhong said, "That official document was written by Li Mu. In my opinion, he probably wants to overturn the case for Li Yi." Gao Hong looked at him and said, "If I remember correctly, Li Yi was once Lord Zhou's close friend. What? Does Lord Zhou not want to see him be convicted?" Zhou Zhong looked at him calmly and asked, "Are you a pig?" Gao Hong slammed the table and said angrily, "What did you say?" Chen Jian, the left assistant minister of personnel, whose injuries were almost healed after taking a pill, walked over and said, "Lord Gao, your question is a little stupid. Back then Lord Zhou was also involved in the impeachment of Li Yi. If Li Yi's case is overturned, you, me, and even Lord Zhou will be sentenced to death. Do you think he would seek his own death?" The right assistant minister of personnel sat down again and said, "My apologies, Lord Zhou. I was rash." Chen Jian said angrily, 14 years ago Li Yi. 14 years later Li Mu. Does this Li guy have a grudge against us? As long as we don't get rid of him, we won't have a day of peace." Zhou Zhong said, "If you want to get rid of him, why don't you think about it? If he really wants to overturn the case for Li Yi, won't you and I be in danger?" Chen Jian laughed coldly and said, "Then he still needs to find evidence. It's easy to prove that he colluded with the enemy and committed treason. 14 years have passed. How can he prove that Li Yi didn't collude with the enemy and commit treason? Even if he proves it, then what? Zhou Chuan is also involved in this matter. Do you want His Majesty to execute his uncle? Even if His Majesty dotes on Li Mu and doesn't recognize his own family, how can the courtiers agree to it? If this case isn't investigated, the imperial court will still be the imperial court. If this case is investigated, the imperial court might not be the imperial court anymore. When that time comes, the imperial court will be in chaos. The 10 Devil Path sects, the country of 10,000 demons, and the ghost region of Yudu will all become restless. His Majesty might not be able to see these things clearly, but do you think those old fogies in the imperial court won't be able to see it clearly?" Zhou Zhong nodded and said, "After hearing Lord Chen's words, I feel much more at ease." Chen Jian said proudly, "Lord Zhou might be better at solving cases than I am, but you still have to learn from me when it comes to matters of the imperial court." Chengdu Palace. There was no morning assembly today. Zhou Yi read a few memorials and felt a little annoyed. He asked, "Where's Li Mu? Did he go to the minister province today?" Mr. Mei said, "I saw him go directly to the imperial kitchen just now." Zhou Yi thought about it and said, "Go to the minister province later and see if there are any new tributes. Send some to him." Mr. Mei smiled and said, "Yes." She was about to leave when Shangguan Li walked in from outside. Zhou Yi said, "Ali, go to the imperial kitchen and see what Li Mu cooked today." Shangguan Li said, "When I passed by the imperial kitchen just now, I saw Li Mu come out from there." Zhou Yi asked, "You didn't come with him?" Shangguan Li shook his head and said, "He went in the direction of the imperial clan temple." Zhou Yi was stunned for a moment. The next moment he looked at the door of the hall and said, "Mei Wei, come back." Chapter 360. The Empress had told Li Mu not to bring food from home, but to cook in the imperial kitchen, which reminded Li Mu of something. The taste of takeout couldn't be compared to the food in the kitchen. The food box could only keep the food warm, but it couldn't preserve the taste. The best time to appreciate most of the food was when it was just out of the pot. Fortunately, the ancestral temple was in the palace. It was only a few steps away, so the taste of the food wouldn't change too much. Compared to the Ministry of Justice and the Supreme Court, the imperial prison of the ancestral temple was of a much higher standard. The prisoners here were either rich or noble. They were either relatives of the emperor or high-ranking officials. Especially in the past, the ancestral temple was a shelter for the descendants of the imperial family after they committed crimes. The facilities and treatment inside were far from what the other government offices could compare to. Especially after Zhang Chun's special arrangement, if the prison of the Ministry of Justice was a standard single room for 7 days, then the one Li Qing of the ancestral temple was now living in the Hilton Hotel's presidential suite. The food in the ancestral temple should be good, but Li Mu was still worried that she wouldn't be used to it. Inside the ancestral temple, the morning sun was just right. Zhang Chun and Prince Shou sat in the courtyard of the ancestral temple, basking in the sun while drinking tea. Zhang Chun personally brewed a cup for Prince Shou and asked with a smile, "Your Highness, this is a good tea that I've collected. Try it." Prince Shou took a small sip and said, "Not bad. I didn't expect you to be a tea lover. Do you have any more of this tea? Give me 8 to 10 caddies. I'll take it back and drink it slowly," Zhang Chun said regretfully. "Unfortunately, this is the last pinch." Prince Shou looked at him with disdain. He suddenly sniffed and said, "What's this smell? It's so fragrant." Zhang Chun's nose also sniffed. After recalling the aftertaste, he murmured, "This smell, why is it so similar to the smell of the noodle stall on the street outside the county office when I was in Yangqiu County?" He couldn't help but gulp and said, "That old woman's noodles are really amazing. I really want to try it again." Li Mu carried the food box and walked into the ancestral temple. He greeted Zhang Chun and said, "I'm going to deliver the food to the boss." Zhang Chun had already warned the officers of the imperial prison of the Zongjing temple. When they saw Li Mu coming in from afar, the guard in charge of the imperial prison opened the door. Before Li Mu entered the prison, Zhang Chun walked over and asked, "You cook noodles?" Li Mu nodded and said, "The boss used to like eating noodles from that restaurant the most." Zhang Chun rubbed his hands and said, "This official also likes this. Do you have any more? Give this official a bowl." Mr. Zhang had helped him a lot this time, and Li Mu was too embarrassed to refuse. He said, "If you want to eat, come to the imperial kitchen later." "All right." Zhang Chun nodded before asking in astonishment, "Did you cook these noodles in the imperial kitchen?" "What else?" Cough, cough. Zhang Chun covered his mouth and coughed a few times. Suddenly he said, "This official suddenly doesn't want to eat so much. I'll go home and eat what my wife cooks. Quickly go and deliver it to Constable Li. It won't taste good if you're late." Watching Li Mu walk into the prison, Zhang Chun sighed and said, Li Mu, you have to be careful." Li Mu walked into the prison and faintly heard Zhang Chun talking about snacks. Mr. Zhang reminded him again to take 2 boxes of snacks from the imperial kitchen tomorrow. The imperial chef in the palace specialized in making pastries, and his skills could be said to be superb. When he went back in the afternoon, he would also bring a box for Lu Hanyan. In the past, Li Mu couldn't take things from the imperial kitchen, but it was different now. The Empress gave him permission to enter the imperial kitchen and use all the ingredients. Although this was suspected of abusing power for personal gain, Li Mu did it deliberately. What the Empress needed was not an imperial chef. If he followed the rules and did what an imperial chef should do, wouldn't he really become an imperial chef? Li Mu learned from palace dramas that the most favored concubine of the emperor was definitely not the kind of concubine who was obedient and had no personality at all. Within the limits, occasionally doing something out of line, sometimes maintaining a sense of novelty and mystery, would be able to obtain the emperor's favor for a long time. Of course, he wasn't the empress's concubine, but he could infer many things from one example. It was the same as being a friend or an official. He asked the jailer to open the prison door and walked in. He opened the food box and said, "I don't know if the food of the Zongjing temple is to your liking. I've cooked a bowl of noodles for you." Li Qing picked up the chopsticks and tasted it. She said in surprise, "The taste of this noodles?" Li Mu smiled and said, "I learned it from the old woman who sold noodles. The taste is about the same as the one she made, right?" Li Qing said softly, "Later on, I went back to Yangqiu County once and learned that the old woman had passed away. Her son and daughter-in-law continued to run the noodle stall, but the noodles they cooked were different from before. I thought that I would never be able to taste the same taste as before in this life. Li Mu smiled and said, "Whenever you want to eat it, just tell me. I'll make it for you." After watching Li Qing finish the noodles, Li Mu sat for a while longer. He packed up the food box and walked to the imperial kitchen. In the imperial kitchen there was still the soup he made for the empress. Using the empress's kitchen to cook noodles for someone else and leaving her aside, even if Li Mu was really stupid, he wouldn't do such a stupid thing. It was just that the empress's soup took a little longer to cook. Li Mu went to the imperial clan temple and waited for a little while before the soup was ready. It was said that he relied on women to make a living. After Li Mu's unremitting efforts, now the empress and Li Qing both relied on him to make a living. Li Mu carried the soup and came to the entrance of Jianghu Palace. Shangguan Li stood at the entrance of the palace and glanced at him. "Her Majesty is not here. You can go back." Li Mu said regretfully, "What a pity. I boiled this soup for Her Majesty for more than 4 hours. It won't taste good after a while. I'll bring it back to the secretariat and drink it myself." Just as he turned around, Shangguan Li's ears twitched and said, "Her Majesty has returned." Li Mu handed the soup in his hand to him and said, "I have to go back to the secretariat. I'll have to trouble Commander Shangguan to bring it in for Her Majesty." Shangguan Li carried the soup into Jianghu Palace and placed it on the table in front of Zhou Yi. After opening the lid of the soup, a fresh and rich aroma floated out. Mr. May's throat moved and he smiled. "I knew it. How could he forget Her Majesty? This soup has been simmering for so long. He must have put in a lot of effort. I just went to the imperial kitchen and asked." He only sent a bowl of noodles to the imperial clan temple. Zhou Yi drank a mouthful of soup and suddenly felt a little embarrassed. It seemed that she had misunderstood Li Mu just now. She thought that he was using her imperial kitchen to curry favor with others. She was angry for a while, but at this moment, the anger in her heart immediately disappeared. She said, "Mei Wei, send 2 boxes of Southern Tribute oranges to him." Mr. May said, "Didn't Her Majesty say that the oranges were very sour and she didn't want to send them?" Zhou Yi said, "Now that I think about it, the oranges don't seem so sour anymore." Mr. May nodded and said, "I'll go now." Zhou Yi suddenly said, "Wait, the secretariat." Li Mu sat in the duty room for a while. After dealing with the official business for the day, he sat quietly for a while and began to write an official document. This official document ordered the Ministry of Justice to reinvestigate the case of Li Yi from 14 years ago. Li Mu had asked the Empress about this matter, but he couldn't let the Empress give the order directly. As the ruler of a country, she should have the concept of the overall situation. If she overturned half of the court just because of Li Mu's words, then what would the court officials think? They would think that this was a treacherous courtier trying to overthrow the government. When an emperor ignored the overall situation of the court and the people of the Great Zhou because of a certain courtier or concubine, the courtiers would unite to oppose her because this was a sign of the collapse of the country. The courtiers would not allow it, and the 4 academies would not sit idly by. In fact, compared to this matter, whether or not Li Yi was wronged or not was not that important anymore. Therefore, Li Mu had to show that although the Empress doted on him, there was a limit. Once he exceeded that limit, he was afraid that he would be removed in the name of cleaning up the emperor's side. Before he finished writing the official document in his hand, Mr. May came. She placed 2 boxes of oranges on the table in front of Li Mu and said, "These are the tribute oranges from South Commandery. Her Majesty asked me to give you 2 boxes to try." Li Mu said, "Thank Her Majesty for me." Mr. May said, "Her Majesty doesn't want your thanks." Li Mu was stunned and asked, "What else does Her Majesty want?" He had already given the Empress everything he could. She could not reward Li Mu with 2 boxes of oranges and ask for too much from him. Mr. May glanced at him and said, "In the future, no matter if you make soup or noodles in the imperial kitchen, send it to Jianghu Palace first." Li Mu was stunned and asked, "This is Her Majesty's idea?" Mr. May knocked him on the head and said, "Her Majesty is so broad-minded. Would she be angry because you sent her soup later?" Only she believed this sentence. No one knew how stingy the Empress was better than Li Mu. Li Mu nodded helplessly and said, "I know. No matter what I do in the future, I will think of Her Majesty first. Is that okay?" After that, he was knocked on the head again. Mr. May glanced at him and asked, "What's with your tone? It sounds like Her Majesty is forcing you to send the soup first." Li Mu promised her that he was willing to give priority to the Empress. Only then did Mr. May leave with satisfaction. Li Mu looked at her back and felt that she was getting more and more strange these days. If this continued, it would be really difficult for her to get married. But Li Mu had more important things to do and did not have time to give her psychological counseling. He finished writing the official document, took 2 tribute oranges, and went to the assistant minister's office. Louis was reading the booklet. Li Mu walked over and put the 2 oranges on his table. He said, "Mr. Liu, take a rest and eat an orange." Louis looked at the 2 oranges and said in surprise, "It's not the season for oranges yet. There are a few mother trees in Nanjun that will bear fruit a month or 2 earlier, but the spiritual oranges on the mother trees are used as tributes." Li Mu smiled and said, "This is the tribute oranges given by Her Majesty." Louis looked at Li Mu with envy and said, "Mr. Li, you are really enviable. There are not many spiritual oranges, and there is not enough for the palace every year. It is difficult for the officials outside to get one. In the time of the former emperor, only the empress and the imperial noble concubines could get a box." He only picked up 1 orange and said, "I only need one of these treasures. I didn't expect to taste spiritual oranges from my hometown in Luoyang." Li Mu said, "So Mr. Liu's hometown is Nanjun. It's okay. Mr. Liu, you can eat as much as you want. If it's not enough, I have more." Her Majesty gave me 2 boxes. Louis was not only envious but also shocked. Back then, the Empress Dowager and Imperial Concubine Dowager were so favored by the previous emperor, but they only received 2 chests in total. His Majesty actually rewarded Li Mu with 2 chests. It was true that she only favored 1 person in all the court officials. He peeled an orange and ate a few pieces. He praised, "It is indeed a carefully cultivated tribute. If a mortal can eat one, they will not be invaded by diseases for 3 years." The 2 chatted for a while. Li Mu took out the document and said, "By the way, there is another document here that needs your signature. It's a small matter." Louis picked up the document. She picked up the pen and was about to sign her name. Then his body trembled. The pen in his hand did not fall. He looked at the document and fell into a long silence. After a while, he looked up at Li Mu and said with some bitterness, "Mr. Li, I only ate half of your orange." Chapter 361. Li Mu looked at Liu Yi and said with a smile, "Lord Liu, this is a spirit orange carefully cultivated by the South Commandery. If a mortal can eat one, they will not be invaded by diseases for 3 years." Liu Yi was speechless for a moment. Finally he sighed and asked, "Have you thought about it, Lord Li?" Li Mu said, "I once made a great vow to establish my heart for the world and my life for the people. How can I watch the heroes of the great Zhou be framed by villains and leave behind a torrent of infamy in history?" Louis picked up the pen helplessly and said, "Give me 2 more oranges." Li Mu stretched out his hand and 2 more spirit oranges appeared in his hand. Louis signed his name on the document and shook his head. "I hope Lord Li has good luck." Li Mu clasped his fist and said, "Thank you, Lord Liu." Louis waved his hand and said, "You're welcome. This document has to be handed over." "It's useless for me to sign it," Li Mu said again. "Lord Liu, please give this to the head of the secretariat." When he left the assistant minister's office, he took away the orange peel on the table and threw it away for Liu Yi. Liu Yi hurriedly said, "Lord Li, please wait. I'll soak the orange peel in water." Ordinary people could not even get the orange peel of the spirit orange that was specially offered by the royal family. Li Mu decided to finish the orange and collect the orange peel. In the future, when he asked Liu Yi for help, he would give him a few taels each time. After all, it was not good to ask for help empty-handed. Li Mu alone could not make the decision to re-investigate the old case from 14 years ago. After his proposal, it needed to go through the assistant minister and head of the secretariat first. Then it would be handed over to the minister for review. Finally, it would be handed over to the minister for implementation. Li Mu could only deal with Liu Yi. The Liu family was one of the oldest surnames in the Great Zhou. It was one of the 9 surnames. Although it was not as powerful as the Shao family and the Zhou family in the imperial court, it could not be underestimated. At the very least, Liu Yi did not have to be afraid of the old and new parties. When Liu Yi saw Li Mu walk out of the assistant minister's office, she put away the orange peel, picked up the document and went to another office. He placed the booklet on the table and said, "Sir, this booklet is from Li Sharon." The head of the secretariat stroked the long beard on his chin and opened the booklet. After looking at it, he pondered for a moment and signed his name on it. He handed it back to Liu Yi and said, "Pass it to the door." Moments later in Minxiao province. It was a letter from the secretariat. After it was delivered to the Minxiao province, it was passed down through the ranks until it finally reached the hands of 2 attendants. The attendant was a provincial official. The 2 of them looked at the booklet in front of them and fell silent. Censor 8 Li Mu of the Secretariat submitted a memorial, requesting that the case of left Assistant Minister Li Yi of the Ministry of Appointments, who had colluded with the enemy and committed treason 14 years ago, be reopened. The resolution of the Secretariat was passed and submitted to the Ministry of Interior for discussion. If a fourth-ranked official of the imperial court was framed for the extermination of his family or was framed for treason, it was only natural that he would be thoroughly investigated. However, the implications of this case were too broad. Both the old and new parties were implicated. It was fine if the case could not be reopened. Once the case was reopened, 2 out of the 6 ministers of the imperial court would be sentenced to death. One of them was the important minister of the Ministry of Appointments. Other than the ministers of the Ministry of Appointments and the Ministry of Works, the 2 assistant ministers of the Ministry of Appointments would be sentenced to death. The assistant minister of the Ministry of Justice would be sentenced to death. Even if the other high-ranking officials in the imperial court were not sentenced to death, they would not be able to escape severe punishment. In this way, the imperial court would be in chaos. Perhaps it would give an opportunity to those with ulterior motives. Compared to this matter, whether or not Li Yi was wronged was not so important. One of the attendants shook his head and said, "The big picture is more important." The other attendant nodded and said, "Agree." Li Mu ate 2 oranges. Before he went to the yamen, the booklet he had handed out was returned to his hands. His request to reinvestigate Li Yi's case was rejected by the Ministry of Family Affairs. In the 3 provinces, the Secretariat of the Secretariat wrote the edict in the tone of the Emperor and had to be submitted to the Ministry of Interior for review. If the Ministry of Interior passed, they would sign their review opinion on the edict and send it back to the Secretariat. The Secretariat would pass it to the Emperor. After the Emperor gave his final approval, it would be sent back to the Ministry of Interior. If the Ministry of Interior did not pass, they would also send the memorial back to the Secretariat. Sometimes they would let the Secretariat revise it before sending it back. Sometimes they would just write the word reject and directly reject it, not giving anyone a chance. The booklet on Li Mu's desk had the word reject written at the end. This meant that the Ministry of Interior did not agree to reopen the case. This kind of thing was very normal. Not to mention the Secretariat, they even dared to reject the Emperor's opinion. They could be said to be the most ruthless department in the imperial court. Of course, if the Empress was stubborn, she could bypass the Ministry of Interior and directly give the order. But in that way, the order in the imperial court would be in chaos. This was not what Li Mu wanted. In any case, he did not expect the Ministry of Interior to agree. This booklet was just a prelude. His purpose was to send a signal to those people. He had accepted Li Yi's case. After that, Li Mu did not mention this matter again. He left the Secretariat and went straight home. There were no secrets between the various departments in the imperial court. Li Mu wanted to reopen the old case of Li Yi from 14 years ago. The fact that his memorial was rejected by the Ministry of Interior spread to the various departments after it was sent to the Yamen. Ministry of Personnel. Right Assistant Minister Gao Hong had just received the news from the Ministry of Interior. He said with a dark face, that Li Mu really wants to reopen the case for Li Yi. Left Assistant Minister Qin Jian sneered and said, "He wants to reopen the case? He can't even get past the Ministry of Interior. Which one of those old fellows there isn't a shrewd old man? The stability of the imperial court is what they care about. They don't care if Li Yi died unjustly," Gao Hong said worriedly, "that Li Mu has the shadow of Li Yi from back then. He also has the Emperor's protection. Sooner or later he will become a big problem for us." Qin Jian said coldly, "Let him jump around. When he jumps around to the point where both sides can't stand it anymore, he will be the next Li Yi. Just wait and see. As long as he dares to insist on reopening the case of Li Yi, even if we don't kill him, the court officials will kill him." Regarding this matter, there were many opinions from the other ministries. This person is still so reckless. How many people are involved in Li Yi's case? This Li Mu is basically the second Li Yi. Even Li Yi back then wasn't as bold as him. It's just that this time he's too whimsical. I just don't know if the Emperor will still go along with him. Could he have fed the Emperor some kind of bewitching potion? Why is the Emperor so good to him? Apart from being a little talented and a little handsome, there's nothing special about him. The Emperor can't be so shallow as to be fooled by his looks, right? If this old case is thoroughly investigated, it will have a huge impact on the situation in the imperial court. Both the old and new parties will be greatly affected because of this, which is not conducive to the stability of the overall situation. If the Emperor ignores the overall situation and the great Zhou for the sake of Li Mu, this is a favored official messing up the government. If he is not eliminated, the Great Zhou will not be peaceful. Once the news of Li Mu's suggestion to reopen the case of Li Yi spread, it caused widespread discussion in the imperial court. In the hearts of some of the officials, the truth of Li Yi's case was no longer important. What was important was whether the emperor's love and care for Li Mu had reached the limit of what an official should bear. Many times, there was no clear boundary between a treacherous official and a loyal official. Although what he did was righteous, if the imperial court collapsed because of him and the Great Zhou fell into a crisis, then he would be a treacherous official who brought disaster to the country and the people. This kind of treacherous official should be eliminated by all the officials. There were even many officials who had a grudge against Li Mu. They were secretly plotting whether they should take advantage of this opportunity to join forces with their respective parties to clean up the emperor and punish the traitorous officials. However, during the morning court, Li Mu remained silent and did not mention a single word about the old case. This was not unexpected by some officials. Perhaps he also realized that if he wanted to investigate the old case, it would involve too many people. Not only would he not be able to find any results, but he would also be implicated. Thus, he was afraid of retreating. This made some people feel disappointed. Compared to Li Mu retreating in the face of difficulties, they hoped that he would walk this path to the end. This would give them a chance to get rid of him. Just like this, the matter that had caused widespread discussion in the various departments yesterday was not mentioned in the morning court today. Just as the officials thought that this matter was going to be forgotten, Mr. Mei walked in from outside the hall. He walked behind the curtain and seemed to say something to the Empress. Soon, the Empress's voice came from behind the curtain. "Enter." A figure slowly floated into the crepe myrtle hall. He bowed to the Empress behind the curtain and said, "Greetings, Your Majesty." This was a middle-aged man wearing a moon-white Taoist robe. His hair was tied up in a tall crown, and he looked like an immortal. On the left chest of his Taoist robe was embroidered the symbol of a white cloud. White Cloud Mountain? Moon-white Taoist robe, a second-generation disciple of the Fulu school. Could he be the head of one of the peaks? What is the head of the Fulu school doing in the divine capital? The officials looked at the middle-aged man in confusion. Although the Fulu school and the imperial court cooperated, it was limited to low-level disciples. This was the first time they saw such an important figure of the Fulu school in the divine capital, in this golden hall. The Empress asked calmly, "Taoist Hyun Jinko, why have you come to the divine capital?" Hyun Jinko said, "I am here on the orders of the headmaster for one person." The Empress asked, "Who?" Hyun Jinko said, "Her name is Li Qing. She is the direct disciple of the headmaster." Most of the officials in the imperial court did not know who Li Qing was. The left assistant minister of the Ministry of Personnel's expression changed slightly. He walked forward and said, "Li Qing has killed many imperial court officials and is a serious criminal. Does the Fulu school want to protect her?" Hyun Jinko shook his head and said, "No. The Fulu school supports the Great Zhou court. If a Fulu school disciple violates the law, the court can punish them according to the law. However, the headmaster knows that Marshal Nice Li's family was wrongly killed more than 10 years ago. He hopes that the court can follow the law and give her an explanation, and also give the Fulu school an explanation." The moment he said this, the imperial court fell silent. The assistant minister of personnel was probably talking about Li Yi's daughter. If the Fulu school wanted the court to give them an explanation, wasn't it asking the court to reinvestigate the case? If this matter was found out by Li Mu, the provincial court would reject the case and it would be over. However, the Fulu school was a colossus that was not inferior to the Great Zhou court. Mount Baiyun was located in the extreme north of the Great Zhou. The ancestral court of Fulu school was the Great Zhou's first line of defense against the Yao kingdom and the Ghost realm in the north. Their orthodoxy was spread throughout the Great Zhou. The court could only be kind and not evil. However, for the sake of the Fulu school, reinvestigating the case of the past would cause unrest in the court. Of course, this was not allowed. The court had to lower their stance and calmly reason with the Fulu school. Even if they refused, they had to show the court's sincerity. This way, even they could not force the court. One of the attendants stood up and cleared his throat. Just as he was about to speak, an angry roar suddenly came from the front of the court. Prince Shou's face was full of anger. He pointed at Hyun Jinko's nose and scolded, "The Great Zhou is the Great Zhou of the court. Why does the court need to explain its actions to others? Who does your Fulu school think you are? How dare you teach the court how to do things?" Chapter 362. The moment King Shou spoke, Some of the officials in the imperial court knew that something was amiss. Most of the people involved in Li Yi's case were from the old party. Even if King Shou didn't want to reopen the case, he couldn't speak to a peak master of Fulu school like this. Among the 6 sects of Dao, only Fulu school and Xuanzong were located in Great Zhou. Xuanzong was located in the east, and there weren't any powerful enemies in the east of Great Zhou. However, things were different in the north. The country of demons and the Hades domain were both located in the northwest. The ancestral court of Fulu school was located in the north, intimidating the demon country and the ghost domain. It was a solid barrier at the border of Great Zhou. Without Mount Baiyun, the demon country and the ghost domain could easily invade Great Zhou. No matter what, the imperial court couldn't become enemies with Fulu school. At the back of the hall, Zhang Chun had already opened his mouth. However, when he heard King Shou speak, he swallowed the words that were already in his throat. Hyun Jinko didn't look at King Shou. Instead, he swept his gaze across the officials and asked, "Is this the attitude of the Great Zhou court?" King Shou had a look of disdain on his face. Just as he was about to continue speaking, he was pulled back by 2 officials beside him. "Your Highness, be careful with your words." The attendant opened his mouth, but he couldn't say the words he wanted to say to delay the matter. King Shou's words left the imperial court with no way out. Now, even if the imperial court didn't want to investigate, they had to. If the imperial court really didn't care about Fulu school's request, wouldn't that mean that they didn't care about Fulu school at all? The deterioration of their relationship with Fulu school would be even more serious than the turmoil in the imperial court. In the imperial court, no one's position was irreplaceable. They just had to pay a price. However, the position of the Fulu school was truly irreplaceable. Without the Fulu school, there was no way the imperial court could send 3 7th realms, close to 10 6th realms, and countless 5th and 4th realms to hold the fort in the northwest region. This would drain most of the imperial court's manpower. The imperial court was completely silent. Hyun Jinko spoke again, "If this is the intention of the Great Zhou court, then I will return to Mount Baiyun and pass on the court's intentions to senior brother sect leader." A moment later, Shangguanli walked out from behind the curtain and said, "Hyun Jinko, you have misunderstood. This case is of great importance. I would like to ask you to wait for 2 more days. After the imperial court has discussed this matter, we will give Fulu school an answer." Hyun Jinko said indifferently, "In 3 days I will return to Mount Baiyun. In these 3 days I will wait for the imperial court's reply." With that, he cupped his fists at the empress again and left. From behind the curtain, the empress said in a dignified voice, "Fulu school cannot be disregarded. The 3 provinces will discuss this matter together. Within 2 days inform me of the results of the discussion." The head of the secretariat and the head of the Minister of High Affairs said in unison, "Yes, Your Majesty." Standing outside the curtain, Shangguanli's voice resounded through the hall. "Dismissed." The officials left the hall in order. On the way back to the Imperial Clan Temple, one of the Imperial Clan officials said, "Your Highness, you were too impulsive. How could you scold Fulu school?" Prince Shou snorted and said, "What's wrong with Fulu school? How dare the Fulu school order the Imperial court? Are they trying to rebel?" The Imperial Clan officials shook their heads and didn't say anything else. Fulu school had existed for thousands of years. Before the Great Zhou, there was already a Fulu school. They had a rich foundation that outsiders couldn't imagine. Even if the imperial court was in chaos, they couldn't make enemies with Fulu school. The imperial clan officials sighed. How could he expect Prince Shou to understand these things? The reason why Prince Shou could be in such a high position was because he was the younger brother of the previous emperor and a member of the Shao royal family. Other than watching opera and drinking tea, he didn't know anything else. If it wasn't because of his identity, the words he said in the imperial court caused a major turn of events that the imperial court didn't want to see. The new and old parties could make him die without a burial ground. Zhang Chun walked behind Prince Shou and said, "Your Highness, last night I found a tale of tea cakes at home. Tomorrow I'll give you half a coin." Prince Shou said, "Half a coin? Zhang, are you trying to dismiss a beggar? Then it's 1 coin. There's only 1 coin left, 1 tale of tea cakes left after a night. Are you going to eat it like grass?" Minister Province, Minister Office. Minister Zhou Jing sat on the main seat. There were 3 people sitting on either side of him. They were the head of the secretariat and 2 attendants. The 4 people in this room were the highest officials of the 3 provinces. They were also the leaders of the Great Zhou's ministers. Minister Zhou took a sip of tea and said, "His Majesty asked us to discuss this matter. My 3 lords, please tell us your thoughts." The left attendant stroked his long beard and said, "How could Li Yi's daughter be the disciple of the Fulu school's headmaster? This matter is too strange. They shouldn't have investigated earlier or later. Why did they have to investigate now? This is too much of a coincidence," the right attendant said. "There's no point in talking about this now. This matter could have been dealt with, but Prince Shou's impulsiveness angered the Fulu school. If this matter isn't handled well, the Fulu school will hate him. That would be bad. But if they really want to investigate, it's fine if there's no problem. If there really is a problem, there will be a storm in the imperial court." Minister Zhou looked at the head of the secretariat and asked, "Elder Yin, what do you think?" Of the 4 people, the head of the secretariat had been through 3 dynasties. He was the most senior. The head of the secretariat thought for a while and said, "The 2 attendants have said so much about the stability of the imperial court. Have you thought about what if Assistant Minister Li was really wronged?" The left attendant sighed and said, "The bigger picture is more important." The head of the secretariat said slowly, "Indeed, the bigger picture is more important." When the head of the secretariat said this, the 3 people in the hall fell into silence. The left attendant and the head of the secretariat were not talking about the same big picture. Compared to the injustice Li Yi had suffered, the stability of the imperial court was more important. Compared to the stability of the imperial court, the relationship with the Fulu school was more important. The imperial court was temporarily in chaos, but it would eventually return to stability. If the relationship with the Fulu school was broken, no matter how stable the imperial court was, it would not be able to create a powerful ally like the Fulu school out of thin air. After a long silence, the left attendant said helplessly, "Investigate." The right attendant sighed and said, "We can only do this." A day later, the 3 provinces gave a reply to Li Yi's case. The Fulu school was a friend of the Great Zhou. The imperial court attached great importance to the reasonable request of the Fulu school. The 3 provinces discussed and decided that the Supreme Court and Zongjing Temple would work together to investigate the case of Assistant Minister Li Yi of the Ministry of Personnel. Regarding this, the Imperial Secretariat had already drafted an imperial edict, and it had been reviewed and approved. Because the case of that year involved the officials of the Ministry of Justice, the Ministry of Justice was purposely avoided. Usually, this kind of matter would go through the procedures of the 3 provinces. It would take at least half a month for there to be a result. This time, all the procedures were completed in one day. It was enough to show the sincerity of the imperial court toward the Fulu school. This was something that could not be helped. Prince Shou had spoken rudely to the head of the Fulu school in the imperial court. This had already pushed the relationship between the imperial court and the Fulu school to the brink of danger. If they did not do their best to make up for it, it would be difficult to heal the animosity between the 2 sides. Zongjing Temple, the prison. Li Qing looked at Li Mu with some astonishment. She asked, "When did I become the headmaster's disciple?" Li Mu explained, "If you did not have such an identity, the imperial court would not have paid too much attention to you. However, this is not entirely a temporary measure. When you get out of here, you will become the headmaster's disciple." Li Qing shook her head. "Why would the headmaster accept me as his disciple?" Li Mu said. "He has to accept you even if he doesn't want to. Now everyone knows that you are his disciple. When the time comes when you return to Mount Baiyun, you will have to attend the disciple recruitment ceremony." Li Qing did not understand. "But why would the headmaster do this?" Li Mu rubbed his nose and said, "When you were not here, a lot of things happened. In short, now that I am also a 2nd-generation disciple of the Fulu school, the headmaster still has to give me face." Li Qing looked at him for a long time before she came back to her senses. She asked, Then do I have to call you martial uncle?" Li Mu smiled and said, "This is nothing. Thinking about it, I am also Hanyan's martial uncle. Don't we also? In short, we can call each other our own. In the future, in front of the headmaster and several heads, you can call me martial uncle. When there is no one, I will call you boss." Chapter 363. Walking out of the Imperial Clan Temple, Li Mu thought back and realized that he seemed to have some kind of magical power. A kind of magical power that could turn people of the same generation into juniors. Whether it was Li Qing, Lu Hanyan, or the 2 little snakes that Li Mu hadn't seen for a long time, everyone's relationship was good at the beginning, but then it started to develop in a strange direction. Fortunately, cultivators didn't care too much about these things. As long as they were willing, they could also become Dao companions. Standing at the door of the Imperial Clan Temple, Li Mu sighed softly. It wasn't easy to save her within the rules. It was just a small step, But this small step was also the beginning of something from nothing. Li Mu had long expected that with his face, the imperial court wouldn't care at all. His memorial couldn't even be passed by the province under his tutelage. But obviously they could ignore Li Mu's face, but they couldn't ignore Fulu School's face. This matter also made Li Mu realize a fact. His strength was only supernatural power. All the status and power he had obtained came from the Empress's favor. Without the Empress he was nothing. Li Mu's face was only useful in front of the Empress. At other times, face had to be matched with strength. If he had the strength of the seventh realm, this matter would have become extraordinarily simple. After lamenting for a while, Li Mu didn't go home. He came out of the Imperial Clan Temple and went to the Imperial Kitchen. Jianghu Palace. Zhou Yi came back from admiring the flowers in the Imperial Garden. When she walked to the front of the palace gate, she smelled a familiar fragrance. This was the unique fragrance of Li Mu's soup. She and Shengguan Li walked into the palace. Mr. Mei greeted them and said, "Your Majesty is back. Li Mu just sent today's lunch." Zhou Yi walked to the table. Mr. Mei took out the lunch box. There were 4 dishes and a soup, all of which were Zhou Yi's favorites. She walked behind the table and found that the memorials on the table had been sorted out. Most of the unimportant memorials had already been dealt with. Some of the important ones were placed on the other side. There was a piece of paper in between the memorials. There were words on the paper. It was Li Mu's handwriting that Zhou Yi was familiar with. She picked up the paper and saw that it was Li Mu's suggestions for the political affairs in the memorials. Even if it was important and required her to deal with it personally, she didn't have to think about it herself anymore. Zhou Yi sat down. As she ate the delicious food, she thought that if she could always have such a person by her side who could go to court and cook for her, who could help her review memorials, and who could also cook for her, and she only needed to protect him from behind, then it seemed acceptable to let her be the emperor. It was a pity that Li Mu was already married. Otherwise, it would be a good choice for him to stay in the palace for the rest of his life. The Imperial Secretariat. Li Mu was thinking about what to do next. Suddenly he felt a chill in his crotch. His heart was suddenly alerted. However, he looked around and didn't find any danger. After eating a tribute orange to calm his nerves, Mr. Mei appeared in his yamen. The Imperial Secretariat was a secret place. Except for the officials of the Imperial Secretariat, outsiders were not allowed to enter. However, Mr. Mei was the Empress's man. She walked around the Imperial Secretariat like it was her garden, and no one dared to say anything. Li Mu was busy. After looking up at her, he lowered his head and asked, "What's the matter?" Mr. Mei walked in and said, "Can't I come and see if there's nothing?" Li Mu picked up a pen and wrote something on the paper. He said, "Of course, but I don't have time to entertain you right now. There's tea in the pot. Pour it yourself." There was no need to be polite with Mr. Mei. Li Mu was more relaxed in front of her than in front of the Empress. Mr. Mei didn't pour the tea. He walked behind Li Mu and asked, "What are you writing?" Li Mu said, "A script." Mr. Mei stood behind Li Mu and looked at him with interest. Suddenly he said, "I have a question that I've been wanting to ask you for a long time." Li Mu said casually, "What is it?" Mr. Mei asked, "I've read the strange stories from a Chinese studio that you wrote. Do you have any special fetishes for ghosts?" Li Mu said, "That was written by Pu. What does it have to do with me?" Mr. Mei said, "There's nothing that can't be found out by the inner guard." Li Mu raised his head and said, "Then you can ask the inner guard to help you. You don't have to trouble the Zongjing Temple and the Dali Temple with Master Li Yi's case." Mr. Mei coughed and said, "The inner guard was established not long ago. How can they find out something that happened more than 10 years ago? You haven't answered my question." Li Mu shook his head and said, "Of course not. I'm just treating everyone equally. There were ghosts and human women in that case. Why did you only see ghosts?" Mr. Mei suddenly understood and said, "I see. I thought you had some feelings for Xiao Bai." Li Mu looked at her in surprise and said, "Why do you have so many strange things to say today? You're just like His Majesty." Li Mu thought of something and said to her, "You're becoming more and more like His Majesty recently. That's not good. You're different from His Majesty. If you imitate His Majesty, you'll delay your life. You might really die alone." Mr. Mei crossed his arms and said, "Tell me, how am I different from His Majesty?" Li Mu said honestly, "Even if His Majesty isn't the emperor, he's still a famous beauty in Luoyang. Whether he's arrogant or gentle, he's always liked by people. Do you think you're as beautiful as His Majesty?" It was only because of Mr. Mei that Li Mu would say such heartfelt words to her. If it were Shangguan Li, she wouldn't be single for the rest of her life and have nothing to do with Li Mu. He wouldn't say such things that might offend people. I know. Mr. May nodded and then asked, do you think His Majesty is beautiful? Li Mu looked at her and asked, don't you think so? Mr. May seemed a little embarrassed and said, of course I think so. Li Mu picked up the pen again and said, if there's nothing else, I'll get back to work. I have to finish writing before I go to the yamen. Mr. May didn't disturb Li Mu. He turned and walked out of the secretariat. Not long after, 2 internal guards brought another box of mandarin oranges, saying that it was a gift from the Empress. Li Mu accepted it happily. The taste of the mandarin oranges was really good. Wan and Xiaobai both liked it very much. Of the 2 boxes of mandarin oranges, a few were given to Zhang Chun and some were left for Li Qing. The rest were quickly finished by them. When he went to the yamen, Li Mu thought that Lu Yi was from South Commandery, which was thousands of miles away from Luoyang. If she could eat mandarin oranges from her hometown here, it might comfort her homesickness. In the assistant minister's office, Lu Yi looked at the 2 oranges that Li Mu handed to her and asked, Mr. Li, haven't you finished the spiritual oranges? Li Mu said, yes, but His Majesty just sent another box. Mr. Lu, you're from South Commandery, so I want to leave 2 for you. Lu Yi looked at the oranges that Li Mu handed to her and was moved. She was about to reach out to take them when she suddenly thought of something. She suddenly withdrew her hands and said, Mr. Li, why don't we talk about the matter first? Li Mu looked as if he couldn't hide anything from her and said, to be honest, I want the imperial court to search the soul of the assistant minister of the Ministry of Personnel and the others. This is the simplest way to investigate the case. I've already written the report. Mr. Lu, please sign it. Lu Yi's face froze and she said, Mr. Li, the spiritual oranges are too precious. I can't accept it. I'm just kidding. Li Mu left the 2 oranges on the table and said, I'm already very grateful to Mr. Lu for what happened last time. These 2 spiritual oranges are just a small token of my appreciation. Seeing Li Mu's back disappear, Lu Yi's face was full of emotion. 3 boxes of spiritual oranges. His Majesty's favor to Li Mu had already surpassed the former emperor's favor to the Empress and the imperial concubine. At this time, the right assistant minister of the Hall of Governmental Affairs came in from outside and put a few reports on the table. He said, Mr. Lu, take a look at these reports first. After we discuss them tomorrow, we'll submit them to Mr. Yen. Hey, why are there 2 oranges here? I'll take 1. Stop. Lu Yi shouted, which scared the right assistant minister of the Hall of Governmental Affairs. Then he realized that he had lost his composure. He put the 2 oranges in his sleeve and said, these 2 oranges have a special meaning to me. If Mr. Su wants to eat them, I'll send you a box in a few days. Great Sound Bar. Li Mu handed a few pages of paper to the owner of the Great Sound Bar and said, please. The owner of the Great Sound Bar said seriously, don't worry, Mr. Li. I'll take care of this matter as soon as possible. After Li Mu left, the owner of the Great Sound Bar looked at the few pieces of paper in her hand. What was written on the paper was a complete play. The play was about an official of the Zhao family of the previous dynasty. Because he had offended a powerful official, he was framed by a treacherous official and his family was tragically exterminated. The surviving orphan of the Zhao family grew up and avenged his family. In the Li residence, Yu Zhenzi took a few pages of paper from Li Mu's hand and floated away. The ancestral court of Fulu School was located in Mount Baiyun. It had branches all over the 36 counties of the Great Zhou. These branches were inherited from the ancestral court and were united with it. Soon this play would appear in all the counties of the Great Zhou. Chapter 364. After making these arrangements, the following matters could not be rushed. All they could do was wait. Lu Hanyin was playing the zither in the courtyard. Li Mu listened as he peeled the spiritual orange the Empress had just given him and fed it to her. When he turned around and saw Wan and Xiaobai staring at him, he also fed them a few pieces. When the song ended, Lu Hanyin turned around and asked, "How's the matter with Constable Li?" Li Mu said, "The Imperial Court has already asked the Imperial Clan Court and the Supreme Court to investigate again. Everything is going according to plan." Lu Hanyin suddenly asked, "When she left you, it was to avenge her family, right?" This question caught Li Mu off guard. From the moment Li Qing appeared in the divine capital, she had never asked Li Mu where he went or what he did every day. She had also never asked him about Li Qing. However, Li Mu knew that she definitely cared. If there was anyone in this world who could make him feel threatened, it would be Li Qing. Li Mu thought for a moment and said, "She withdrew from the Fulu school." She didn't tell all her friends because she didn't want to implicate the sect and us. Lu Hanyan was silent for a moment and then whispered, if Constable Li hadn't left at that time, could it be? Li Mu hugged her from behind and said, there's no if. We're already husband and wife. I've already given you my primordial yang that I've treasured for 20 years. What are you still worried about? Lu Hanyan whispered, I was worried that after you met Constable Li, you wouldn't want me anymore. Clearly she was the first person you met and the first person you liked. Li Mu suddenly realized that he might have been too busy with Li Qing these past few days and neglected her. Lu Hanyan seemed to be strong and opinionated, but in reality the experience of being abandoned by her parents when she was young made her easily lose her sense of security. Coincidentally, Li Qing was the person who made her feel the most insecure. Li Mu felt a little guilty. He hugged her tighter and said, what are you thinking? If I don't want you, where can I find another purine body that is so young, so beautiful, so versatile and so good in the kitchen? You will always be the first wife of the Li family. In the future, no matter who enters this family, they will have to listen to you. After being comforted by Li Mu, Lu Hanyan's worries for the past few days had disappeared. While she was feeling touched, she seemed to have realized something and asked, who else will enter the house in the future? I'm just giving an example. When you make an analogy, who are you thinking of? Li Mu gave Xiaobai a look and Xiaobai immediately ran over. She took Lu Hanyan's hand and said, whether it's in the past or in the future, Sister Wanwan and I will listen to Sister Lu. Li Mu took the opportunity to get away and said, I'll go to old Zhang's house to ask about the progress of the case. The Zhang mansion was also in the North Court, not far from the Li mansion. Li Mu left the house and walked a few hundred steps. Inside the Zhang mansion. Think about it. How old are you? Why don't you find a husband and stay at home all day? When can you get married like this? I won't get married, okay? You still dare to talk back? Hearing the quarrel from the inner courtyard, Zhang Chun looked helpless. At a certain moment, she noticed that the footsteps in the inner courtyard were getting closer. She immediately picked up a broom and started sweeping the yard. Mrs. Zhang walked out of the inner courtyard. She wanted to find a place to vent, but when she saw Zhang Chun cleaning the yard obediently, she didn't want to lose her temper. She turned around and walked into the inner courtyard. She shouted, do you think I won't scold you if you hide in the house? Open the door. As soon as Li Mu walked into the Zhang mansion, Zhang Chun threw down the broom and said, you're finally here. If there's anything, let's talk outside. Not long after, in a wine shop on the streets of Luoyang, Zhang Chun drank a few cups and complained about his disobedient daughter and irritable middle-aged wife. Then he said, you're here to ask about the progress of Li Yi's case, right? Li Mu nodded and asked, how's the investigation going? Zhang Chun shook his head and said, it's easy to prove a person's guilt, but it's harder than reaching the sky to prove his innocence. Besides, although the imperial court has compromised this time, it's only on the surface. The Zongjing Temple and the Supreme Court won't spend too much effort. If the few minor officials who left the Ministry of Personnel were still alive, it's possible to find a breakthrough from them. But they've all died in the hands of Constable Li. And just yesterday, the only old official who had been in the Ministry of Personnel for more than 10 years was found dead in his home. He died of old age. Li Mu raised his wine cup and slowly twirled it between his fingers. How could there be such a coincidence in the world? When the Imperial Court wanted to investigate Li Yi's case from 14 years ago, the only person from the Ministry of Personnel who had personally witnessed the incident died of old age. Even if Li Qing didn't kill those people for revenge, they would probably die in the next few days due to various reasons. There were too many people who didn't want them to find out the truth of the incident. Li Yi's main crime back then was treason with the enemy. The officials from the Ministry of Personnel accused him of leaking important secrets of the Imperial Court to a certain demon nation. This led to the Department of Imperial Offerings suffering heavy losses in the war with the demon nation. Almost all of them were wiped out. Because of this case, Li Yi's entire family was exterminated. Only one daughter escaped because she was not in the divine capital. There was no way to find out the truth of what had happened back then. Even the most powerful cultivators could not divine a trace of the heavenly secrets. It was too difficult to overturn the case for him. Ministry of Personnel. Left Assistant Minister Chen Jian clasped his hands at a middle-aged man and said with a smile, Minister, don't worry. Even if they investigate again, they won't find anything. The person standing in front of him was the Minister of Personnel, Xiao Yun. At the same time, he was also the Duke of Nanyang, a core member of the old party. More than 10 years ago, he was still the right assistant minister of the Ministry of Personnel. Now he was the head of the Ministry of Personnel. He looked at Qin Jian and asked, "Are you sure you didn't miss anything?" Qin Jian smiled and said, "Originally there were quite a few of them, but they were all killed by Li Yi's daughter. Does this count as lifting a rock and smashing one's own foot?" This official would like to know what expression she would have if she knew about this. The Minister of Personnel nodded and said, "That's good." In the Imperial Ancestral Temple, Li Qing lowered her head in self-blame and said, "I'm sorry. If it wasn't for me they might have had a chance." Li Mu comforted her and said, "You don't have to blame yourself. Even without you they wouldn't have survived these few days. Those people wouldn't have let them live. Don't worry, I'll think of something." Li Mu was most worried that Li Qing would feel guilty and blame herself. After comforting her, he walked out of the Imperial Ancestral Temple and met Zhou Zhong outside the temple. Zhou Zhong looked at him indifferently and said, "Give up. If this goes on, Li Yi's ending will be your ending." Li Mu looked at him and turned to leave. Zhou Zhong asked, "You really don't want to give up?" Li Mu looked back at him and said in a deep voice, "I'm not you. I will never give up on her. Never." Zhou Zhong looked at Li Mu's departing figure until it disappeared from his sight. Only then did a faint smile appear at the corner of his mouth. From afar, one could see that his figure was slightly hunched, as if he had put down something important. Ziwei Palace. There wasn't anything important in today's morning court. Li Yi's case, which had been a hot topic for the past few days, became the focus of the court's discussion. Although the court had ordered a re-investigation of this case, even with the combined efforts of the Imperial Ancestral Temple and the Supreme Court, they couldn't find a single clue. After all, 14 years had passed since this case. Almost all the clues had disappeared in the river of time. It was as difficult as ascending to the heavens to find a new clue. In the Great Hall, the left assistant minister of the Ministry of Personnel stepped forward and said, "Your Majesty, the evidence for Li Yi's case was conclusive back then. Investigating it now is already an exception. We can't keep wasting the court's resources because of this case." The Minister of Works, Zhou Chuan, also stepped forward and said, "The Fulu School wants to investigate this case. The court has already satisfied them and given them an explanation. The court has its dignity and can't be forced by them." The officials of the new party and the old party had already spoken. Their wishes represented the wishes of most of the court. If His Majesty still insisted, it would damage the court's dignity and the officials in the court would not agree. At this moment, the Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Justice, Zhou Zhong, also stepped forward. The officials in the court already knew that the new party and the old party had joined forces to settle Li Yi's case. Under everyone's gaze, Zhou Zhong walked to the center of the court, took off his official hat and slowly knelt down. When the officials saw this, they were all stunned. "Lord Zhou why is he kneeling? Why did he take off his official hat?" The officials were in an uproar. In front of the crowd, Prince Shou stared blankly at the kneeling Zhou Zhong and muttered, "Good fellow?" Zhou Zhong knelt on the ground and placed his official hat beside him. He touched the ground with his head and said loudly, "I'm guilty." Chapter 365. The strange behavior of the Assistant Minister of Justice caused the atmosphere in the hall to explode. What is Assistant Minister Zhou saying? He's guilty? What crime did he commit? This can't be. Good heavens, does he want to die? In the imperial court, some people quickly realized something and looked at Zhou Zhong with astonished eyes, their faces full of shock. There were very few fools in the imperial court. In the blink of an eye, countless people had guessed Zhou Zhong's motive. Where the officials from the Ministry of Personnel were, the expressions of the three people changed. Zhou Chuan's expression also changed. Qin Jian's face was pale as he thought to himself, "Impossible, impossible, he will die if he does this." At this moment, Zhou Zhong, who was kneeling on the ground, spoke again. Zhou Zhong spoke in a deep voice, 14 years ago, I was bewitched by Qin Jian, the imperial physician of the Ministry of Personnel, Gao Hong, and the right assistant minister of the Ministry of Personnel, Xiao Yun, to frame the left assistant minister of the Ministry of Personnel, Li Yi, for treason. Qin Jian could not allow him to continue. He strode forward and said loudly, "Zhou Zhong, what are you talking about? Do you know what the punishment is for framing an official of the imperial court?" Zhou Zhong said indifferently, "So you also know that framing an official of the imperial court is a serious crime." He raised his head and said, "Everything I said is true. I am willing to accept the soul search." A rank 4 official was willing to accept the soul search. This was enough to prove that what he said was true. Zhou Zhong's words caused the imperial court to fall silent for a moment. Then it became noisy again. Since he wants to confess, why did he wait until today? You can't tell. Before today, who would have thought that the imperial court would reopen this case? But why did he do this? Back then he framed Li Yi, but today he confessed. Zhou Zhong didn't make a difference to what happened back then. Even without him, Li Yi's ending wouldn't have changed. In my opinion, he wanted to use this opportunity to gain the trust of the old party and enter the inner circle of the old party. It was all for today's betrayal. 14 years? He was so patient and loyal to the old party for 14 years, just to commit a crime for his brother? King Shou looked at Zhou Zhong and sighed. He actually endured for 14 years. This Zhou Zhong is truly a man. Realizing the current situation, he covered his mouth and coughed lightly. He gritted his teeth and said, "This person is really sinister." Li Mu, who was standing in the crowd, was also shocked. Zhou Zhong's actions were completely out of his expectations. He recalled what Zhou Zhong had said to him in front of the ancestral temple yesterday and seemed to have understood something. It turned out that he had already made his decision at that time. Li Mu thought that Zhou Zhong was someone who would give up everything for his political ideals. He would commit crimes for Li Qing's life and death, or even his own life and death, compared to some of his ideals were not worth mentioning. However, Zhou Zhong's actions today overturned Li Mu's understanding of him. Behind the curtain, the Empress's voice could be heard. Arrest Zhou Zhong and all the people involved in this case. Bring them to the Imperial Clan Temple and have them interrogate by the 3 provinces. Although Li Yi's case was not investigated, once something was found, no one would be able to cover it up in front of everyone. During the morning assembly, 2 ministers and 3 assistant ministers were arrested. Other than that, there were also some people involved in the case who were not in the assembly. The internal guards were immediately ordered to arrest them. No one would have thought that this matter would have such a huge turn of events. Those people who framed Li Yi all those years ago thought that victory was in their hands, but they didn't expect that there would be a spy among them. From the beginning to the end, Zhou Zhong was not on the same side as them. He had endured for 14 years waiting for this day. His counterattack caught both the old and new parties off guard. Although 14 years had passed since they framed a rank 4 imperial court official and caused extremely serious consequences, each and every one of them would not be able to escape death according to the law. In the Imperial Clan Temple, a few of them had their powers sealed and were sent to prison to await trial by the 3 provinces. This case involved a lot of people and no department had the ability to investigate it alone. Li Mu walked into the most luxurious prison. Li Qing woke up from her meditation and asked softly, "What happened outside? Why is it so noisy?" Li Mu opened his mouth but didn't know what to say for a moment. After organizing his words, he said slowly, "Just now in the assembly, Zhou Zhong admitted in front of His Majesty and hundreds of officials that he was involved in framing your father. Now, the Minister of Personnel, the Minister of Works, and the left and right assistant ministers of personnel have all been arrested." Li Qing said anxiously, "He did not frame father. He did all this for their dreams. One day he could reverse the verdict for father." Li Mu nodded and said, "I know. You don't have to worry. I will report this matter to His Majesty. Although this is not enough to pardon him, he should be able to avoid death. Although Zhou Zhong's actions were pardonable, he could not be completely forgiven by the law just because he was pardonable. After all, he was still considered one of the main culprits back then. Seeing that he had voluntarily confessed to the crime and confessed to being an accomplice, according to the law, he could be spared. Of course, no matter what, after this incident he could no longer be an official. After a while, Li Mu walked out of Li Qing's prison and came to another place. Zhou Zhong was imprisoned here. He was imprisoned separately from the others. Li Mu stood outside the prison and said, "I thought you would not stand up." Zhou Zhong looked at him and said, "If you could really find out anything, why would I stand up?" Li Mu shook his head and said, "This is not your style. If you want to achieve your dreams, you have to protect yourself. This is what you taught me." Zhou Zhong was silent for a moment and said slowly, "But this may be his only chance. If he misses it, there will be no chance for him to regain his innocence." 14 years had passed since Li Yi's case. If the case was closed a second time, it would be impossible to overturn the case in the future. Li Mu looked at him and asked, "So you gave up on your dreams?" Zhou Zhong's gaze was deep as he said calmly, "The flame of dreams will never be extinguished. As long as the flame is still there, the flame will be passed on forever." In another prison cell, with the assistant minister of the Ministry of Personnel as the leader, the few of them had ugly expressions. Not long after, the door of the prison cell was opened and 3 more people were pushed in. Qin Jian's face was pale as he said, Marquis Zhongyong, Count Pingon, Marquis Yongding, you have all been captured too? The three of them were shocked when they saw the few people in the prison cell. After realizing something, they said in shock, "Could it be?" Qin Jian gritted his teeth and said, "That damned Zhou Zhong betrayed all of us." After understanding the whole story, the three of them had completely gloomy expressions. The assistant minister of the Ministry of Personnel, Gao Hong, sighed and said, "If Zhou Zhong's soul is searched and he reveals what happened back then, the few of us will probably be sentenced to death." Qin Jian said, "We are all grasshoppers on the same rope. We must think of a way or else it will be difficult for us to escape death." The Marquis Zhongyong shook his head and said, "Death is impossible. My family still has a death exemption medallion bestowed by the late emperor. As long as I don't rebel, no one can punish me." The Count Pingon also sighed, "It's a pity that the medallion passed down by my father is gone. I originally wanted to pass it down from generation to generation." The Marquis Yongding had a pained expression as he said, "My family's medallion probably can't be kept. That damned Zhou Zhong, if it wasn't for his bewitchment back then, the three of us wouldn't have participated in this matter." Qin Jian said in shock, "All of you have death exemption medallions?" The Marquis Yongding nodded and then looked at the three people opposite him and said, "Not only us, the late emperor also bestowed one to the Duke of Nanyang." Although Assistant Minister Gao didn't have one, concubine Gao should also have one. She wouldn't not save her brother. The Minister of Personnel glanced at Zhou Chuan, who was in the corner, and said indifferently, "The Zhou family's 2 death exemption medallions have already been used last time. I wonder if the Empress will spare Minister Zhou." Zhou Chuan looked at him and said indifferently, "Unfortunately, father-in-law gave that medallion to my wife before he passed away." Qin Jian looked at the people around him in a daze and felt that he didn't fit in with them. Out of the 7 people standing here, only he didn't have a death exemption medallion? The Minister of Personnel saw his worry and said, "Don't worry, the late emperor bestowed 13 medallions and we have already used 12 of them. If I remember correctly, the last medallion should be in the hands of Prince Shou." Hearing Prince Shou's name, Qin Jian heaved a sigh of relief and immediately said to the jailer outside the door, "Quickly go and report that I want to see Prince Shou." Not long later, Prince Shou walked over slowly. Qin Jian grabbed the bars of the cell and said hurriedly, "Prince Shou, you must save me." A moment later, after hearing his words, Prince Shou smiled and said, "What kind of relationship do we have? Everyone is doing this for the Shao family. Isn't it just a medallion? I will give it to you." Qin Jian heaved a sigh of relief and said, "Thank you, Your Highness." Prince Shou touched his waist with one hand and his expression suddenly changed. He said in shock, "Where is my medallion? Where did my big medallion go?" Chapter 366. Prince Shou touched his body and said regretfully, "I seem to have lost my token." Qin Jian grabbed the bars of the cell and said with a trembling voice, "Prince Shou, please don't scare me. This concerns my life." Prince Shou thought for a while and said, "Well, I'll go back and look for it. It shouldn't be lost. You wait here and I'll tell you when I find it." Seeing Prince Shou leave quickly, Qin Jian leaned against the wall weakly. He looked at the other people in the cell talking and laughing. The atmosphere was very lively. But the lively atmosphere was theirs and he had nothing. Although they were in the same cell, they were not the same. At the same time, in another cell, Zhou Zhong said slowly, "Back then he and I offended the interests of the upper class and strongly opposed the death exemption token issued by the late emperor. The courtiers and the emperor could not tolerate us. He was framed for treason. Although there was not enough evidence, what they needed was just a reason. Before he died, he entrusted Qing to me and asked me to protect myself first and then slowly complete our great cause." "For our great cause, we can give up everything?" Li Mu asked. "This is the reason why you gave up on her?" Zhou Zhong nodded and said, "At least before you moved to Fulu school, I had no other choice." This was the reason why Li Mu had been guarding against Zhou Zhong. This kind of person had a firm goal and was extremely rational. In their eyes, family and friends were not as important as their great cause. They could sacrifice themselves at any time. Li Mu admired his patience and ambition, but he would not get too close to this kind of person. He looked at Zhou Zhong and asked, "You made a choice in the end?" Zhou Zhong looked at Li Mu and said, "This is not a choice. I believe that if I didn't finish it, someone will do it for me and do it better." Li Mu said, "Don't look at me like that." Zhou Zhong continued, "Back then the late emperor gave out 13 gold medallions. He tried his best to abolish it, but he incurred the displeasure of the late emperor and died because of it. All these years, 3 of the 13 gold medallions have been used up. Including the old concubine's gold medallion and the Zhou family's gold medallion, there are 7 left. Among these 7 medallions, 6 will be used up this time. The last one is in the hands of Prince Shou. These things shouldn't have existed from the beginning to the end. In the future we will probably never see them again. Having said this, he leaned against the wall and sat down. He closed his eyes and said, "You can go. I'm already very tired. The prison of the Imperial Clan Temple is a good place to sleep." As soon as he finished speaking, his breathing calmed down and he actually fell asleep. Li Mu slowly walked out of the prison. In the courtyard of the Imperial Clan Temple, Prince Shou and Zhang Chun were playing dice under the shade of a tree. King Shou's gambling luck had always been bad. In front of Zhang Chun, there was already a pile of silver fragments. After losing another round, King Shou searched his chest and sleeves. Finally, he couldn't find a single piece of silver. Zhang Chun kept the silver fragments and said, "Why don't we stop here today and wait for the next round when you have enough money?" King Shou slammed a piece of gold on the table and said, "Who are you looking down on? Let's continue. I'm going to win back all the money I lost last time." Zhang Chun looked at the piece of gold and said in surprise, "This piece of gold, why does it look so familiar?" Li Mu looked at it from afar and also felt that it looked familiar. This piece of gold was squarish. Other than the fact that there were no words on it, it looked like it was carved from the same mold as the death exemption medallion. King Shou glanced at Li Mu from afar and asked, "Little Li, are you coming?" 15 minutes later, Li Mu carried the gold and left the Imperial Clan Temple. He planned to melt this thing when he returned. This thing wasn't light and should be enough to make a few pieces of jewelry. He would give 1 to Lu Hanyin, 1 to Li Qing and 2 to Wan Wan and Xiao Bai. If there was any left, he could give it to the Empress. At this moment, the entire Shindu was in an uproar because of something. Today, Li Yi's case, which affected the hearts of countless people, had a shocking turn of events. The first person to suggest reinvestigating the case was Li Mu from the Central Secretariat. He felt that it was unfair for Li Yi back then and wanted to reverse the case for him, but he was rejected by the imperial court. After that, people from the Fulu school in the northern county came and forced the imperial court to pay attention to this case. On the surface, the case was reinvestigated because of the Fulu school. However, the officials living in the northern courtyard saw the head of the Fulu school entering and leaving the Li residence on the day of Li Mu's wedding. It was obvious who was behind this matter. The commoners did not know what happened after that, but they roughly knew that the imperial court did not find out anything about the old case. There were also voices of opposition in the imperial court. If there were no accidents, this matter would be left unsettled in the end. However, no one had expected that the case would take such a huge turn. Zhou Zhong, the assistant minister of the Ministry of Justice, who was a core member of the old party and had made many contributions to the old party over the past decade, admitted in front of all the officials and His Majesty that he had conspired with the old party to frame Li Yi back then. He had single-handedly sent the masterminds of the old case to the Zongjing Temple. Among these people were 2 ministers of the 6 ministries and 2 assistant ministers. This was the case that had the greatest impact on the court in all these years and involved the widest range of people. And this was only the mastermind. If the accomplices were included, who knew how many people in the court would be implicated? However, why did Zhou Zhong do this became a mystery in the hearts of the people. Did Zhou Zhong lose his mind? Not only did he court death, but he also pulled in his accomplices. I don't understand, I really don't understand. That's right, what do you think he's after? Did something go wrong in his cultivation and he was invaded by his inner demons, causing him to go crazy? In my opinion, it might be because of the unequal distribution of benefits that caused internal strife. In the entire divine capital, everyone in the streets, taverns and tea houses were discussing this matter. No matter how they thought about it, they could not imagine that the people who framed Li Yi back then were not found by the imperial court. Instead, they were wiped out because of internal strife. As for why Zhou Zhong did this, there were different opinions. Some said that he was invaded by his inner demons, some said that he had lost his mind, and some said that the old party had internal strife. In a restaurant somewhere, an old man could not listen anymore. He slammed his wine bowl on the table and said in a deep voice, "Did you forget that more than 10 years ago, other than Li Qingtian, there was also Zhou Qingtian in the divine capital?" What Li Qingtian, Zhou Qingtian? 14 years ago I was only 5 years old. I was still playing with P. I didn't know anything. Old man, what are you talking about? The young people in the restaurant were confused. A few of them who were over 30 years old seemed to have thought of something, and a look of realization appeared on their faces. More than 10 years ago, when the late emperor was still on the throne, it was the darkest period of the divine capital in their memories. At that time, the rich and powerful only needed to pay a fine to kill someone. At that time, it was not uncommon for the rich and powerful to kidnap women on the streets. At that time, the officials of the Great Zhou were corrupt and governance was chaotic. The people suffered greatly. The people of the divine capital would rather take a detour than walk past the government. Even during those dark times, there was still light in the divine capital. At that time, the assistant minister of the Ministry of Personnel, Li Yi, punished the corrupt officials and brought justice to the officials of the divine capital. The director of the Ministry of Justice, Zhou Zhong, redressed the grievances of the people. The two of them persuaded the late emperor to abolish the Silver Penalty Act and stopped him from giving out the gold medallion. At that time, they were one of the few rays of light in the hearts of the people of the divine capital. They were known as Qing Tian. However, this situation did not last for long. Later, the assistant minister of the Ministry of Personnel, Li Yi, was accused of treason, and his entire family was killed. At that time, the people of the divine capital could not accept this result. Assistant Minister Li was righteous and loved the people like his own children. How could he be a treacherous official? What made it even more difficult for the people to accept was that the director of the Ministry of Justice, Zhou Zhong, was one of the officials who accused him. They used to admire Zhou Zhong, but later on they hated him as much. After Assistant Minister Li's death, Zhou Zhong quickly sided with the old party and became their lackey. A few years later, he was promoted to the position of Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Justice. Over the years, he protected many people from the old party and helped the old party fight against dissidents and the new party. Soon he became the core of the old party. For more than 10 years, the people who were grateful to Li Yi would spit at the Ministry of Justice when they passed by to vent their hatred. However, no one expected that more than 10 years later, Zhou Zhong would stand up for Li Yi in the imperial court without hesitation and reverse the verdict. Someone finally recalled and said in disbelief, "Could it be that Lord Zhou has been enduring humiliation for the past 14 years just for this day?" That's right. Otherwise it doesn't make sense. Why would he give up the power he already had? Could it be that we've been wrong about Lord Zhou all these years? Lord Li and Lord Zhou are brothers of different surnames. Back then, Lord Zhou must have known that he couldn't save Lord Li, so he went undercover in the old party and gained their trust. He waited for the right time to reverse the verdict for Lord Li and give those people a fatal blow. 14 years, he was scolded by us for 14 whole years. How much has he been wronged all these years? The truth of what happened back then had been revealed. Many people were filled with regret and their respect for Zhou Zhong was even greater than before. Li Mu's residence. When Li Mu used the true samadhi fire to burn the gold cake, he realized that it was only coated with a layer of gold powder on the surface. The inside was black and looked like iron but not iron. He did not know what it was. Li Mu then threw it into the flask heaven dimension. Prince Shou actually used a gold-plated fake to trick him. He had to be more careful when gambling with him in the future. At the same time, in the Imperial Clan Temple, Prince Shou sighed and walked to the front of the prison cell. He looked at Qin Jian apologetically and said, "Assistant Minister Qin, I'm really sorry. I've searched everywhere for that death exemption golden medallion but couldn't find it. It should have really been lost. Don't worry. Every year on your death anniversary, I'll get people to burn more paper money for you." Chapter 367. Of course, the material used to make the death exemption golden medallion was not ordinary metal. Li Mu had asked Hyun Jinko about it. According to Hyun Jinko, the metal in his hand was a piece of meteoric metal. In the cultivation world, meteoric metal was called meteoric metal. It was a metal that did not exist in the 10 continents. It was extremely tough and was most suitable for refining weapons. It was one of the main materials for refining heaven-grade magic treasures. Therefore Li Mu found a new box and put it away. It might be useful in the future. Then he began to think about something. Although Zhou Zhong's suicide attack was useful, according to the law, he himself could not escape the death penalty. Of course, Li Mu could not watch him die. After thinking about it, he left the house and walked toward the palace. At the same time, in the southern courtyard, it was a mansion with more than 10 entrances. Several figures gathered together. They did not look happy. "I've told you that Zhou Zhong is a traitor. We can't trust him easily. Now, not only have we lost control of the Ministry of Justice, but we've also given away the entire Ministry of Personnel. What's the point of saying all this now? Who knew that Zhou Zhong would be so cunning? He seemed to listen to us on the surface, but he always had evil intentions. He destroyed all our years of hard work. Preposterous. I can't take this lying down. The people present were all members of the Shao royal family. They were all furious that Zhou Zhong had betrayed them. At this moment, one of them looked at King Shou and asked, "Fourth brother, don't you still have a death exemption golden medallion? Give it to Qin Jian. He has been loyal to us for many years. Even if he didn't make any contributions, he still worked hard." King Shou spread his hands and said, "I lost that death exemption golden medallion." "What? You lost it? Where did you lose it? You actually lost such an important thing? What else can you do?" King Shou shrugged and said helplessly, "I can swear to the heavens that the death exemption golden medallion is no longer in my hands. Perhaps this is his fate." "You really lost it? You really lost it? Have you searched for it?" "I tried using an object-seeking talisman, but I couldn't find it." "Look at you, other than drinking tea, listening to operas and gambling with dice, what else can you do? How did our Shao clan end up with you?" "So I forget it. Whether Qin Jian dies or not, I don't care. But Zhou Zhong must die. If he doesn't die, he will forever be a disgrace to our Shao clan. Anyone can survive, but Zhou Zhong must die. Send this letter to the Zhou family. They should know what to do. Didn't he want to overthrow Li Yi? I would like to see who will save him this time." In the Jianghu palace, Li Mu prepared the dishes for the empress. He also poured fresh and fragrant tribute tea into a jade cup and placed it beside her hand. Zhou Yi said, "There are no outsiders here. You can sit down too." Li Mu said, "I'll just stand. If your majesty has any orders, please call me." Zhou Yi glanced at him and asked, "Why are you so good to me today?" Li Mu asked, "Did I not treat your majesty well in the past?" Zhou Yi was speechless for a moment, then said, "That's not what I meant." Then she said softly, "Sit down. I don't want to eat alone." Li Mu sat opposite her and accompanied her to eat for a while. At a certain moment, he raised his head and asked, "Your Majesty, how do you plan to deal with Zhou Zhong?" Zhou Yi said, "According to the law, he should be beheaded." Li Mu quickly said, "But he turned himself in and confessed all his accomplices. It can be considered meritorious. Shouldn't he be given a light sentence?" Zhou Yi took a memorial from the side and handed it to him, saying, "This is the memorial that the secretariat just handed over. Take a look." Li Mu opened the memorial. From the signature, it was handed over by an official of the new party. In this report, there was a detailed list of cases where Zhou Zhong had covered up for the officials of the old party over the years. A single case was not a big deal, but when all of them were put together, it was enough to convict him of the felony of bending the law for personal gain. This crime could be heavy or light. If it was light, it could be a forfeit of salary. If it was heavy, it could be beheaded. In the past 10 years, in order to gain the trust of the old party, Zhou Zhong used the power in his hands to cover up many officials of the old party. He also violated the law and did many things that were beneficial to the old party. They were all listed in this memorial. Perhaps only the old party itself could understand these things in such detail. It seemed that Zhou Zhong's behavior of harming himself and hurting the enemy had thoroughly angered the people behind the old party. The old and new parties joined forces to put him to death. In order to execute Zhou Zhong, the old party even exposed some of their own scandals and sacrificed some people. The purpose was to make Zhou Zhong's death irreversible. Zhou Yi picked up a piece of tofu and slowly ate it before saying, "These crimes added together are enough for him to die twice." Li Mu picked up his chopsticks and put them down, saying, "I think that although Zhou Zhong violated the law in the past, there is a reason behind it that cannot be ignored. His good friend was wronged and died tragically. He had no way to seek justice through the imperial court and the late emperor. How desperate was that? In order to redress his good friend's case, he violated morality and endured humiliation until today. He is praised and respected by the people. If the imperial court does not care about the reason and sentences him to death, I'm afraid that people will not be convinced." Zhou Yi glanced at him and asked, "So, you are here to plead for him?" Li Mu looked at her eagerly. "Your Majesty," Zhou Yi said helplessly. All right, I promise you." Li Mu's appetite suddenly improved. If he had known that acting coquettishly could settle this matter, he would not have thought of so many reasons. Perhaps this was what it meant to be fearless when one was favored. For this favor, Li Mu was willing to be her intimate cotton jacket for the rest of his life. Zhou Yi added, "I can only save his life. In the future he will no longer be the assistant minister of the Ministry of Justice and will need to stay away from Luoyang." Li Mu said, "As long as you can keep him alive, that is enough." After serving the empress, Li Mu walked out of Jianghu Palace and let out a long sigh of relief. Li Mu had already reached the limit of what he could do by not executing Zhou Zhong directly. It was also considered an explanation to Li Qing. If he made any further requests, it would be difficult for the Empress. Of course she was the Empress. Her words were the law. It was not impossible for her to pardon Zhou Zhong and Li Qing directly. However, Li Mu still hoped that the imperial court would maintain order. He would not let the Empress walk down the same path as the previous emperor. Imperial Secretariat. The head of the Imperial Secretariat, the head of the Imperial Secretariat, the head of the Ministry of Justice, and the servants gathered to judge Zhou Zhong. In fact, there was nothing much to try in this case. The soul-searching technique was not difficult for the presiding judges. With Zhou Zhong's active cooperation, the details of the case were revealed at a glance. Li Yi's crime of treason was purely a false accusation. Among them, the officials of the Ministry of Personnel Zhou Chuan, the Marquis of Zhongyong, the Duke of Ping'an and the Marquis of Yongding were the masterminds of the case. According to the law, they should be executed. However, among these 7 people, 6 of them had a gold medallion. A gold medallion bestowed by the previous emperor could exempt them from all crimes except for rebellion. They would be stripped of their official and noble positions, but they could keep their lives. Even so, this was a huge blow to the imperial court. Out of the 6 ministers, 2 of them were executed in this case alone. None of the 3 main officials of the Ministry of Personnel were left. Just filling up the vacant positions was a huge headache for the 3 provinces. However, the outcome was already decided. If the case was not investigated, then so be it. No matter how much injustice Li Yi had suffered, as long as the imperial court did not investigate, there would be nothing. As long as the imperial court did not investigate, the ministers of the Ministry of Personnel were still ministers, and the assistant ministers were still assistant ministers. They were still important officials and pillars of the imperial court. However, since the imperial court had investigated, no matter what the outcome was, they had to accept it. The other 6 were already prepared. After the 3 provinces made their verdicts, the 6 gold medallions were placed on the table of the imperial secretariat. Only the left assistant minister of the Ministry of Personnel Chen Jian sat on the floor and muttered, "I'm so stupid. I only knew that I was with you to frame Li Yi, but I didn't know that all of you had gold medallions except for me. I regret it, I really regret it." After sentencing the masterminds, the left assistant minister asked, "How should we deal with Zhou Zhong?" The right assistant minister said, "Based on the crimes he has committed over the years, he should be executed." The left assistant minister looked at Zhou Jing and asked, "What do you think, Lord Zhou?" Zhou Jing said, "I am deeply ashamed that my younger brother framed a loyal official. I will leave the following matters to the 3 of you." With that, he slowly walked out of the imperial secretariat. The head of the imperial secretariat shook his head and said, "I am also a little tired. You 2 can do as you see fit." With that, he also left with his hands behind his back. The left and right assistants looked at each other and exchanged glances. Zhou Zhong had single-handedly turned the imperial court into a mess. After this incident, both the new and old parties hoped that Zhou Zhong would disappear forever. His disappearance would be a good thing for the imperial court. The left assistant minister cleared his throat and said, "If that's the case then..." At this moment, Mr. May walked in from outside and said, "His Majesty has decreed that the Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Justice, Zhou Zhong, tried to redress his friend's innocence. Although it is pardonable, it is not pardonable by law. From today onwards, he is stripped of his position as Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Justice and will be banished to the army." The 2 assistants looked at each other again and bowed at the same time. "Yes, Your Majesty." Although banishment to the army was lighter than the death penalty, it was still more severe than exile. Moreover, the place of banishment was near the borders of the demon nation or the netherworld. It was desolate and dangerous. Even if the banished person did not die under the blade of the executioner, he would die under the hands of the demon ghosts. The difference was that the latter way of dying was to protect the great Zhou. It was more heroic than the former way of dying. Criminals who were banished to the army were usually used as cannon fodder. Even if they were at the 5th realm, they would not survive. This ending should be enough to satisfy those people. At the Imperial Clan Temple. "You are not righteous. You will not die a good death. You will not die a good death." When Qin Jian was escorted into the Imperial Clan Temple's prison again, he could not help but roar with grief and indignation. Zhang Chun sat under the shade of a tree and shook his head. "If you knew this would happen, why did you do it in the first place?" King Shou sighed and said, "The heavenly Tao is clear. There will always be people who have to pay the price for their past mistakes. Although the imperial court is big, it cannot tolerate animals. Zhang Chun looked at King Shou in surprise. He said in surprise, I can't believe you would say something like that, Your Highness. King Shou waved his hand and said, this is something I learned from the opera. It's based on my feelings. It's not targeted at anyone. Come, let's continue. Today I will win back all that I lost in the past. Chapter 368. Due to Assistant Minister Zhou Zhong's public confession, the left Assistant Minister Li Yi of the Ministry of Personnel, who was framed for treason 14 years ago, was finally vindicated today. A rank 4 official of the imperial court was exterminated because of false accusations. This was a great insult to the imperial court and the great Zhou. Although His Majesty had issued a decree to declare Lord Li's innocence, what had happened could never be undone. Outside the imperial city, the commoners were filled with righteous indignation when they saw the notice posted on the city wall. The culprits from back then could have been pardoned with the death exemption medallion. Why was Lord Zhou banished? Lord Li was loyal to the emperor and his country. In the end, the lives of his family were worth less than a few broken medallions? The reality is even more absurd than the dramas. How sad, how sad. Have you seen the new drama, Zhao's Orphan? It's clearly about Lord Li. Not yet. Hearing you say that, I'll have to go and take a look. In a mansion in the southern courtyard, the Duke of Nanyang, who had been pardoned with the death exemption medallion but lost his position as the Minister of Personnel, frowned deeply and said in a gloomy voice, Zhou Zhong is only banished. These crimes are enough for him to die twice. His Majesty is obviously siding with him. A person beside him said, forget it. It's just a matter of time. How many of the criminals who have been banished have been able to live for more than half a year? The Duke of Nanyang said indignantly, I can't take this lying down. It took me more than 10 years to climb to this position. Because of Zhou Zhong I have nothing now. I can't wait to kill him. That person was silent for a moment before saying, even if you want to kill him, you can't do it now. Once he leaves the capital, no one will care if he's dead or alive. Right now there's another important matter. The Duke of Nanyang asked, what is it? The person said, have you forgotten that Li Yi's daughter is still imprisoned in the imperial clan temple? After being reminded by him, Commandery Prince Nanyang recalled that this matter had started because Li Yi's daughter had assassinated 5 imperial court officials to avenge her father. This had triggered the old case. However, in recent days, his attention had been focused on the old case and he had completely forgotten about this matter. That person continued, during this period of time, that Li Mu went in and out of the Zongjing temple many times. He would visit this woman almost every day. It seems that they knew each other before. The reason he wanted to reverse the verdict for Li Yi was probably because of this woman. Royal Prince Nanyang narrowed his eyes and said, these are 2 completely different cases. I would like to see how Li Mu will save her, unless he can convince His Majesty to grant him a death exemption medallion. The person next to him had a playful smile on his face as he said, a large part of the reason for Li Yi's death was because he opposed the death exemption golden medallion. If he used the death exemption golden medallion to save that woman, then it would be the biggest joke. If he didn't use the death exemption golden medallion, then the woman would be dead. What choice would he make? Royal Prince Nanyang asked, what if he really begs His Majesty to grant him the death exemption golden medallion? Bewitching the Son of Heaven, treacherous officials who will harm the country. Murderous intent appeared in that person's eyes as he said, clean up the emperor's subordinates and punish treacherous officials. Northern County. Countless people gathered under the city walls and looked at the notice posted on the city walls. They were pointing and discussing. Most of the commoners were illiterate and only came to join in the fun. They did not know what was going on. Someone scratched his head and asked, is there anyone who is illiterate? Help me take a look. What is written on this notice? Let me take a look. A middle-aged scholar squeezed into the crowd. After looking at the notice, he said, it says that more than 10 years ago, there was a high-ranking official who served the country and the people in the divine capital. Because he offended the nobles, he was framed for treason and his entire family was executed. A few days ago the imperial court cleared his name. The northern county was far away from the divine capital. The commoners did not know what happened in the divine capital, nor did they know the high-ranking officials in the divine capital. However, someone was confused and said, why does this sound like the play that the Union Pavilion put on a few days ago? The middle-aged scholar sighed and said, this play was actually written for him. This Lord Li used to be a good official who was loved by the commoners. In the divine capital he was called Li Qingtian by the commoners. Unfortunately he always worked for the commoners and went against the nobles. After offending the nobles, he was framed and his entire family was exterminated. He was wronged for more than 10 years. If not for his daughter avenging her father by killing the officials who framed him back then and alerting the imperial court, no one would have cleared his name. There's actually such a thing? It's even more dramatic than a play. Even I want to watch that play. Unfortunately, I don't have the money. Who did not like to listen to plays? However, to the commoners, being able to eat and wear was already a luxury. Wouldn't it be better to spend a few coins to buy steamed rice? Spending money to listen to plays was the life of the rich. At this moment someone asked, "Don't you know that the Union Pavilion is not paying for the plays these days?" Someone was shocked. There's such a good thing? It's not just the Union Pavilion. In the past few days there's also a stage set up by the official road outside the city. It's free to perform. Those who have the money can attend it. Those who don't have the money can also attend it. So the stage at the city gate is for watching plays. If they said that it's free, I would have gone to watch it. Let's go together. Wait for me. The commoners did not have much entertainment, so they were naturally happy to watch a play that they could watch for free. The Union Pavilion's theater was filled to the brim. The area around the stage outside the city was also filled with commoners. It was the slack period, so there were not many opportunities like this. The commoners in the surrounding area carried stools before the sun rose. The play was called The Orphan of the Zhao Family. It told the story of an official of the Zhao family from the previous dynasty. Because he often sought justice for the commoners, he offended the nobles in the capital. He was framed by a treacherous official and his family was exterminated. The surviving orphan of the Zhao family endured for many years to avenge his family. The story of the play was twisted and bizarre, with climax after climax. At the end, the orphan of the Zhao family killed the treacherous official with his own hands to avenge his father. It was so satisfying that the commoners could not help but think of Dou-Yi's injustice. The commoners loved to watch plots where good had good karma and evil had evil retribution. This was not the only reason why the play was so popular. It was also because the content of the play was not fabricated. Instead, it was based on the original. The official of the Zhao family in the play was Li Yi, the assistant minister of the Ministry of Personnel, whose entire family was exterminated because of the crime of treason. The empress had already informed the 36 counties of the Great Zhou of his injustice. Most of the commoners knew about it. Sigh, he's already dead. What's the use of redressing the injustice? Why can those people still use the death exemption golden medallion to save their lives? They should all be buried with that lord. It's a pity that the imperial court is controlled by those people. That lord's daughter had no way to redress the injustice. She was forced to take revenge on those corrupt officials. I wonder how the imperial court will deal with her? What else can they do? They'll definitely give her the death penalty. After all, she violated the law. *T the law. Is the law used to protect the murderer? The law can't give justice to others, but it doesn't allow them to seek justice for themselves. Why can those people continue to enjoy glory, splendor, and wealth after framing others and destroying their families? Why can't even leave behind the last bloodline of those who were wrongfully killed? What kind of *T justice is this? The imperial court announced this to the world and let the commoners of the 36 counties know about this matter. They originally wanted to give justice to Li Yi. Unexpectedly, after the commoners learned about the inside story, they became even angrier. The official who was framed for treason was redressed, but what about those who harmed him back then? They were still alive and well and continued to be people above others. However, that lord's only descendant was going to be executed. What was the point of such redressing? The so-called law was only used to restrain the commoners. Those nobles could treat the law as nothing. With a token they could avoid the death penalty. In their eyes, the commoners were no different from livestock that could be killed at will. Under such anger, someone finally could not help but say, if that lord's bloodline is cut off, there will really be no justice. Why don't we protest the imperial court with blood and protect that lord's bloodline? As soon as this was said, it immediately received the response of many people below the stage. I agree. Count me in. My family sells cloth. I'll pay for the cloth used for the blood letter. I'll go back and ask the village chief to mobilize the entire village. In just a short day there was a blood letter movement in the North County. The angry commoners ran around and tens of thousands of commoners pressed their fingerprints on the white cloth. Regarding this, the North County government watched from the sidelines. At the same time in Yantai County, a few commoners walked out of the theater and discussed among themselves. So County Officer Yu is the prototype of the villain in the play. He really deserves to die. To think that I felt sad for him. He framed a good person in exchange for a promotion. Too hateful. I heard that someone outside the city wrote a blood letter to protest the imperial court. I'm going. Do you want to come? Let's go. Yushan County. So this is the reason why the two lords died. The case back then has been investigated. Even if they didn't die, they would be beheaded by the imperial court. They deserved it. Danyang County. Nanyang County. Yantai County. In just a few days, similar things happened in the 36 counties of the Great Zhou. After the local government learned of the inside story, to prevent civil unrest, they ordered the commoners to stop gathering. However, the letter was secretly passed down from village to village, Shindu. After the case was revealed, the punishment for the people involved in the case back then was quickly implemented. Other than a few main culprits, the officials who joined forces to impeach Li Yi back then were just following the trend. Now they were only fined their salaries and were not punished too much. Just by punishing a few main culprits, there was already a huge loophole in the 6 ministries. The 3 provinces were also in a mess. If the accomplices were to be held accountable one by one, the imperial court would probably completely collapse. The left assistant minister of the Ministry of Personnel, Chen Jian, had already been executed. As for the others, because they had the death exemption token, no one could do anything to them. In the hall of the secretariat, Li Mu opened a letter. The contents of the letter were about an official urging the imperial court to quickly deal with the assassination of the 5 officials. Chapter 369. In fact, all the things that had happened in the divine capital these days revolved around the murder of several imperial court officials. The reason why few people mentioned this matter was that most people were attracted by Li Yi's old case. Now that the old case had been clarified, those who should be rehabilitated had been rehabilitated, and those who should be sentenced had been sentenced. The original case had been pushed to the forefront again. The headmaster had notified almost all the subsects to help Li Mu obtain the book of 10,000 people from the various counties. Based on the feedback from Mount Baiyun, the progress of this matter had been pushed forward by more than half. Now was not the time. Li Mu closed the memorial and put it aside. In the Commandery Prince mansion of Nanyang, Commandery Prince Nanyang looked at an official and asked, "Are you sure the memorial has been handed in? It has been 3 days. Why is there no news at all?" The official scratched his head with a puzzled look and said, "It has been handed in. I personally handed it in. Is it still going through the process?" "The Central Secretariat is going through the process. Why would it take so long?" Commandery Prince Nanyang looked at Xiao Ziyu and said, "Ziyu, you are the head of the Central Secretariat. Can't you urge him?" Xiao Ziyu shook his head and said, "Uncle, you don't know. I am in charge of the Ministry of Works. The memorials related to the Ministry of Justice are directly handed to Li Mu. After Li Mu deals with them, they will be handed to the assistant minister. If Li Mu doesn't put them in, the memorial can't be handed in at all." "Sure enough," Commandery Prince Nanyang said with a sullen face, "he and Li Yi's daughter are unclear. He will definitely cover for her. The memorial can't be handed to the Central Secretariat. It should be handed directly to His Majesty." The official nodded and said, "I will try." Chang'an Palace. Li Mu opened a memorial. It was still asking the imperial court to deal with Li Qin. Whether it was the handwriting or the content, it was exactly the same as what he saw 3 days ago. This official was rather persistent. Li Mu noted down the name of this official from the Ministry of Personnel, Wang Luan, and put the memorial aside. After calculating the time, he stood up and walked to the imperial kitchen. The empress took Xiao Bai to the imperial kitchen to admire the flowers. Before she returned, Li Mu had to prepare lunch. 3 days later. Royal Prince Mansion of Nanyang. Commandery Prince Nanyang paced around the room and asked, "Why is there still no news?" The official was also puzzled and said, "I don't know either." At this moment, a servant walked in and whispered a few words into Duke Nanyang's ear. Commandery Prince Nanyang was taken aback and asked, "Book of 10,000 people?" The servant nodded and said, "Someone from King Ping's mansion came to pass on the news. Someone is urging the people in the various counties to write a petition to plead for mercy for that woman." Commandery Prince Nanyang snorted coldly and said, "So that's what he's planning. If this matter attracted the attention of the people in the 36 counties and caused them to write a petition to the people, the imperial court might really compromise. After all, the people's hearts were the foundation for the continuation of the Great Zhou. If it was only the Luoyang, it would be fine. However, if the people of the 36 counties all pleaded for mercy for that woman, even the law would have to give in. If they also had the book of 10,000 people when they were sentenced, then he would still be the Minister of Personnel now. If he couldn't get something, then no one else could. Commandery Prince Nanyang's expression was cold as he said, "Although I don't know who gave him the idea, it's impossible for him to save Li Yi's daughter. How dare he hold the people's hearts hostage and make the Ministry of Personnel send the consecrated department to destroy all the book of 10,000 people." After all these years of operation, the Ministry of Personnel had been built into an iron bucket by him. The people in the Ministry of Personnel were all officials of the old party. Although he wasn't in the Ministry of Personnel, he still had absolute control over it. When the official named Wang Luan heard this, he bowed and said, "I'll make the arrangements right away." In a certain county, in front of a temporary stage built outside the city, an actor who had just finished his performance took out a roll of silk and said, "The book of 10,000 people is only a few hundred people away. Everyone, please sign your names on this and do your part to protect the bloodline of the loyal officials." After listening to the play, the people were already enraged. They were filled with righteous indignation as they pressed their fingerprints on the silk. The material used to leave their fingerprints was originally made of cinnabar. However, some people directly bit their fingertips in anger and left their fingerprints on the silk. Not long after, the people gradually dispersed. An actor looked at the densely packed fingerprints on the silk and heaved a sigh of relief. He said, "It should be enough." Just as they were about to leave, a few powerful auras suddenly approached above their heads. Several figures floated down from the sky and said coldly, "The consecrated department is handling the case. Leave the book of 10,000 people and we can let you go." 15 minutes later, the consecrated department's mouths were stuffed with rags and tied to a tree. The actors flew into the air and flew into the distance. "I didn't expect that we, the disciples of the Fulu school, would come out to perform. The person that the imperial court wants to execute is the disciple of the sect master, which is our martial uncle. In order to save martial uncle, this is something that should be done. Didn't you see that even our master has personally come? Let's not talk about it anymore. The book of 10,000 people for this county has been collected. When we return and hand it in, everyone will be able to obtain an earth-ranked Fulu. Such a good thing should be given more." After many days, Li Mu once again saw Yu Zhenzi in his home. Yu Zhenzi stepped into the courtyard and waved his hand. Many bolts of cloth floated in front of Li Mu. These bolts of cloth were covered with red fingerprints. They were clearly ordinary cloth, but they emitted powerful auras, forcing Lu Hanyan, Wanwan and Xiaobai to retreat. When the auras swept over Li Mu, they seemed to resonate with some aura on his body and gently passed through him. Yu Zhenzi said, "These are the book of 10,000 people for the 36 counties." Li Mu put away the 36 bolts of cloth and said, "Many thanks, senior sister." Yu Zhenzi said, "Senior brother sect master said that if the great Zhou court does not distinguish between good and evil, then there is no need to stay in the divine capital. It is better to return to the Fulu school as soon as possible to raise your cultivation and prepare to succeed the sect master." Li Mu smiled and said, "I believe in His Majesty." Although the great Zhou court was not worth it within the divine capital, there was still someone like Li Mu who was worth it. In recent days, many officials in the imperial court had submitted memorials, requesting that Li Yi's daughter be severely punished. However, the memorials they submitted were like stones sinking into the sea. There was no response. During the morning court session, an official finally could not bear it anymore. An official from the Ministry of Personnel stood up and said, "Reporting to His Majesty, under the circumstances of Li Yi's case being unclear, Li Yi's daughter assassinated 5 officials of the imperial court. Such behavior is truly too vile. If she is not severely punished, it will not be enough to uphold the law and establish the prestige of the nation." As soon as he finished speaking, another person stood up. Zhang Chun looked at him and said, "Sir, your words are incorrect. How could Lord Li's daughter not know whether or not he committed treason? Those 5 people were the main culprits who framed Lord Li back then. Even death could not wipe out their crimes. If they did not die, they should be executed today." The official from the Ministry of Personnel said, "The nation has its own laws. If they are guilty, the imperial court will judge them. It is not up to her to execute them privately." Zhang Chun said mockingly, "The imperial court? Lord Li has been wronged for 14 years. Has the imperial court had any intention of overturning the case for him? On the other hand, the officials who framed him back then were all in high positions, from 4th to 3rd rank officials. How do you expect people to trust the imperial court? The official from the Ministry of Personnel said coldly, this is also not a reason for her to kill. If we forgive her, how can we uphold the law? Zhang Chun retorted, if we uphold the law, how can we uphold the will of the people? The two of them were in a heated argument. Shang Guanli walked out from behind the curtain and said, silence. The Empress's voice was heard from behind the curtain. What do you think? As soon as she finished speaking, the hall fell into a brief silence. Usually, the highest-ranking officials would be the first to speak on this topic. However, people like the head of the Secretariat and the ministers of the 6 ministries would not quarrel with others in the imperial court. Most of the time, it was the officials below them who spoke on their behalf. After a brief silence, some officials stood up one after another. I think that Lord Wang of the Ministry of Personnel has a point. One case is another case. These two cases should not be mixed together. Lord Li Yi has been wrongly accused, but his daughter has indeed violated the law. Seeing these people step forward, many officials sighed in their hearts. Although that was the case, the imperial court still owed their family in Li Yi's case. If they still wanted to execute his daughter, then what was the point of overturning the case for him? However, because of Li Yi's overturning of the case, both the new and old parties were deeply involved. Even if they had different opinions, they did not dare to speak out. After another official seconded the motion, a figure finally walked out from the crowd. The officials in the imperial court all looked at him. These days, everything that happened in the imperial court was caused by Li Mu alone. This time he was probably one of the people who wanted to protect Li Yi's daughter. Li Mu walked to the front of the hall and did not express his opinion. He only said calmly, I would like your majesty and all the officials to see something first. With a wave of his hand, a pile of things suddenly appeared in the crepe myrtle hall. There were a total of 36 pieces of what looked like cloth and silk. They slowly flew into the air, then connected together and slowly unfolded. A shocking scene appeared in everyone's eyes. The 36 pieces of cloth connected together formed a huge canvas that was 200 feet long. The canvas was densely covered with blood-red fingerprints. As the canvas unfolded, an extremely powerful aura suddenly spread out. Under the impact of this aura, the officials in the hall could not help but retreat. Some even fell on their buttocks. Only a small number of people were able to remain standing under the impact of this aura. Behind Li Mu, several officials who had just stood up and suggested that Li Qing be severely punished retreated more than 10 steps. One of them even directly withdrew from the crepe myrtle hall. An official looked at the huge canvas in front of him and saw the faint smell of blood on it. He murmured, a blood letter of the people, a blood letter of the people condensed from the power of faith of the people. Li Mu stood in front of the canvas and slowly said, Lord Li was loyal and patriotic, but because of a scoundrel's framing, his entire family died in vain. The imperial court owes the Li family too much. The people of 36 counties, 360,000 people, plead your majesty for mercy. Chapter 370. In the crepe myrtle palace, the 36 scrolls of the Book of the People floated in front of the officials. Although there were no words on the unfurled white cloth, the fingerprints and palm prints represented the wishes of the people. The will of the people could not be deceived, nor could it be defied. This was the foundation of the great show. Under the pressure of the Book of the People, the officials who had just stepped forward to request the execution of Li Yi's daughter found it difficult to speak again. They could no longer speak. After Li Mu took out the Book of the People, if they spoke again, the opposition would not be from Li Mu, but from the will of the people. For the imperial court, in the face of the will of the people, there was nothing that could not be compromised, including them. The noisy imperial court suddenly quieted down. After a long period of silence, a figure slowly stepped forward. Zhang Chun bowed and said loudly, Your Majesty, please have mercy. His voice echoed in the crepe myrtle palace. Soon, another official took a deep breath and slowly stepped forward. He bowed and said, Your Majesty, please have mercy. 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 1 figure, 2 figures, 3 figures. In the hall filled with the will of the people, more and more officials stepped forward. Finally, at the front of the crowd, the head of the Secretariat held up his ceremonial tablet and said, The will of the people cannot be defied. The former assistant minister of the Ministry of Personnel, Li Yi, suffered 14 years of injustice. The people pity him. This is Li Yi's death and also the imperial court's death. I implore your majesty to comply with the will of the people and show mercy." The two attendants also sighed softly and stood out. Although Li Yi's daughter violated the law, but considering that her family was framed by treacherous officials and suffered great injustice, and the people she killed were all guilty officials, I implore your majesty to show mercy. The will of the people cannot be defied. Your majesty, please have mercy. The head of the secretariat and the attendants all pleaded. Finally, even the head of the officials stepped forward and said slowly, "The will of the people is the most important. I implore your majesty to comply with the will of the people and pardon Lord Li's daughter." Behind the curtain, the empress's voice was majestic. "Since this is the will of the people of the 36 counties, and the ministers have pleaded for her, I can't be stubborn. After the court, the secretariat will immediately draft a pardon." Imperial Ancestral Temple. Li Mu walked into the deepest part of the prison and said, "Open the door." The prison guard behind him immediately took out the key he had prepared and opened the cell door. Li Mu walked into the cell, reached out his hand to Li Qing and said, "Let's go home." Outside the imperial city, a large crowd had gathered on the wide street. Countless gazes were focused in the direction of the palace gate, until two figures walked out of the palace. It's young Lord Li. The woman beside him is Lord Li Yi's daughter. Has the court finally pardoned her? Lord Li Yi has a descendant. Seeing the two of them walk out side by side, the commoners spoke excitedly. Li Mu and Li Qing walked out of the palace and back to the Li residence. The people of Chengdu followed them all the way. Standing in front of the Li mansion, Li Qing raised her head and looked at the plaque with the words, "Li Mansion" written on it. It stood there for a long time. Creak. The door of the Li mansion slowly opened from the inside. Lu Hanyan walked out and looked at Li Qing. She smiled and said, "Welcome home." In the crepe myrtle palace, when Li Mu took out the book of 10,000 people from the 36 counties, some people had already lost. Once the book of 10,000 people, which represented the will of the people, the court officials, whether they were willing or not, only had one choice. In the end, under the lead of a few officials from the 3 provinces, all the court officials pleaded for mercy. In addition to the push of the people's will, the empress could only reluctantly comply with them and pardon Li Qing. In the Li mansion, Li Mu sat cross-legged on the bed. The telekinesis in his body was almost full. When he walked out of the palace with Li Qing, the entire street was covered by telekinesis. He had just taken out the spiritual jade from the flask space. In just a moment, the spiritual energy in the spiritual jade would be completely absorbed. Even the speed at which he took out the spiritual jade could not keep up with the speed of absorption. At this moment, in the North Court, with the Li Mansion as the center, a huge spiritual energy whirlpool had formed. The spiritual qi in the air of the entire divine capital was gathering towards the Li residence in the northern garden. In the divine capital, some of the more powerful cultivators had already noticed the abnormality. Especially those who lived in the North Court, they could clearly feel that the spiritual energy in the surroundings was becoming more and more abundant. However, when they tried to absorb it, they realized that they could not absorb any spiritual energy at all. The huge spiritual energy whirlpool in the North Court was violently absorbing all the spiritual energy in the surroundings. Someone is breaking through. What exactly is this person's cultivation? How could he cause such a huge commotion? Countless figures flew up from all directions and looked in the direction where the spiritual energy was gathering. That place is the Li Mansion. This familiar feeling. Could it be that Li Mu is also cultivating telekinesis? It's the same as Li Yi back then. No wonder his cultivation speed is so fast at such a young age. He actually dares to cultivate this path. Such a fast and domineering way of gathering spiritual energy was not something a normal cultivation path could achieve. Even a spirit-gathering array was far from it. Only telekinesis could have such an effect. The path of telekinesis was the fastest way to improve one's cultivation among all the paths of cultivation. The reason why so few people cultivated it was not because they did not want to, but because it was too difficult. Telekinesis originated from the people. To win the people's trust, one had to stand on the people's side. However, the interests of the people and the interests of the people in power were often contradictory. To stand on the people's side was to stand on the opposite side of the people in power. To walk on this path, one had to dare to do what ordinary people did not dare to do. There had been people who had done this before, but they had all died. After that, very few people walked on this path. If Li Mu did not have the Empress's protection, he would have been like Li Yi back then. His entire family would have been executed countless times. It was also because of the Empress's protection that he could walk to this day and become a righteous person in the hearts of the people in the divine capital. He relied on the people's telekinesis to quickly break through. The spiritual energy vortex above the Li mansion spun for more than 2 hours. It almost sucked out all the spiritual energy in the divine capital before it slowly dissipated. At the same time, Li Mu, who was sitting cross-legged on the bed, slowly opened his eyes. The divine light in his eyes was restrained. The aura on his body was also extremely obscure. In the past he was a sharp sword. Now he had hidden his edge. Saving Li Qing was something he had to do. It was also in accordance with the people's will. With this, the telekinesis of the people in his body reached its peak. It allowed him to break through to the 5th level in one go. It also allowed him to resolve one of his obsessions. Li Mu walked out of the room. Hyun Jinko stood in the courtyard and smiled. "Congratulations, junior brother." Li Mu clasped his hands and bowed to the two of them. "Thank you for your help these days, senior brother and senior sister." Hyun Jinko said, "There's no need for thanks between fellow disciples." Yuzenzi said calmly, "The disciples of the Fulu school are not to be bullied." Hyun Jinko continued, "Junior brother, you just broke through. Your magic power is not stable yet. First stabilize your cultivation. As for other things, it won't be too late to talk about them later." Li Mu said, "I'll stabilize it later. I still have something to do. I have to go out for a while." Outside the palace, Li Mu and Li Qing stood side by side as they watched Zhou Zhong walk out of the palace. His hands were shackled by iron chains and his dermic powers were also sealed. This chain would only be removed when he arrived at the place of exile. 2 Fifth Realm worshippers stood behind him. They would escort him all the way to the place of exile. Zhou Zhong looked at Li Qing with a gentle gaze. Finally, he looked at Li Mu and said, "When you have time, go to the Ministry of Justice and find Wei Peng. He has something that I left for you. Wei Peng is a promising talent. With a little promotion he can take on great responsibilities." Li Mu nodded and said, "I understand." Zhou Zhong looked at Li Qing again and said, "Listen to Li Mu in the future. Don't be so rash. He knows how to protect you better than I do." Li Qing lowered her head and said softly, "Okay." Zhou Zhong finally looked at Li Mu and said, "Take good care of Qing'er." One of the worshippers said, "It's time to go." Zhou Zhong's gaze swept across his face and said, "Let's go." After sending Zhou Zhong out of the city with Li Qing and back to her residence, Li Mu went to the Ministry of Justice. Soon, the director of the Ministry of Justice walked out of the office and sighed, "Lord Li, Lord Zhou, I really didn't expect." Li Mu said, "This might be the result that he wanted. Where's Wei Peng? I have something to talk to him about." The director of the Ministry of Justice sighed again and said, "I'll go get him." After a while, Wei Peng walked out of a guard room. He seemed to know Li Mu's purpose and handed a wooden box to Li Mu. This wooden box was not locked. It seemed to be just a simple buckle. Li Mu tried to open it but found that he could not open it at all. He channeled his magic power and used the art of great strength but still could not open it. Li Mu looked at the wooden box carefully and found that there were complicated runes carved on the box like a seal. From the complexity of these runes, it would be very difficult for him to open it with his current magic power. Therefore he took the wooden box and returned to the Li residence to let Yuzinzi and Hyun Jinko take a look. Hyun Jinko looked carefully and said, "This is a seal rune. It can only be opened with brute force. If other methods are used or if the runes are destroyed, I'm afraid the item in the box will also be destroyed." He tried to open the wooden box but still failed. Yuzinzi tried again but it still ended in failure. She looked at the wooden box in her hand and said, "This seal is too strong. I'm afraid only those above the 7th realm can open it. If you have time, go back to Mount Bayun and ask senior brother Sect Master for help." Li Mu waved his hand, "No need." After a while, Chang'e Palace. Li Mu took the wooden box and walked to Zhou Yi saying, "Your Majesty, I can't open this." Crack. Zhou Yi took the wooden box and opened it easily. Li Mu leaned over and saw a book in the box. He took out the book, flipped through a few pages and slowly closed it. Chapter 371. In Chang'e Palace, Li Mu handed the booklet to Zhou Yi and asked, "Your Majesty, how should we deal with these people?" Zhou Yi flipped open the booklet and glanced at it a few times. Then he asked Li Mu, "What do you think?" Li Mu thought for a moment and said, "I think that the great Zhou's imperial court has been suffering from a chronic problem for a long time. The court officials have formed cliques for personal gain, and in order to suppress dissidents, they will do anything. If we want to cure this chaos, we need to use strong medicine. Your Majesty can also take this opportunity to support some of your trusted aides. Zhou Qiong rubbed the space between his brows and said to Li Mu, I'll leave this matter to you. Li Mu bowed and said, I obey. The booklet Zhou Zhong gave him recorded the crimes of many officials of the two parties over the years. Some of them were corrupt, some of them took bribes, some of them bent the law for personal gain, and some of them abused their power. These records filled the entire booklet. A month ago, Li Mu felt that the imperial court should still be stable. Over the past month, Li Mu gradually realized that the Great Zhou's imperial court had a problem from the root. Rather than maintaining the stability on the surface and letting them slowly nibble away at the decaying Great Zhou, it was better to cut the Gordian knot and use strong medicine to weaken the old and new factions. At the same time, power would gradually return to the hands of the Empress. When the Empress completely controlled the imperial court, whoever passed the throne of the Great Zhou to would have nothing to do with the old and new parties. Even if the Empress didn't pass the throne to the Zhou clan or the Shao clan, it would be her own business to pass the throne to her own son. Or, if the Empress's cultivation reached the 8th level, then no matter how strong the old and new parties were, they wouldn't even have the right to protest under absolute power. In that case, who would dare to bully him in the entire Zhou province, let alone the imperial court? Unfortunately, this could only exist in Li Mu's imagination. The Empress' 7th level came more from her inheritance than from her own cultivation. Unless she encountered a greater opportunity, the 7th level was the peak that she could reach in this lifetime. At present, all the 7th realm powerhouses that Li Mu knew, including Shen Jizi, were promoted to the upper realm through inheritance. Zhou Yi leaned against the dragon throne and propped up his head. He said, I'm a bit tired. Here are a few memorials. Help me take a look. Li Mu moved a chair and sat in front of the table. He said, Your Majesty should rest first. When you wake up, the soup in the imperial kitchen will be almost ready. Although it was unlikely that a 7th realm cultivator would tire herself out, Li Mu didn't forget that the Empress' inner demon had yet to be removed. Suppressing the inner demon was an extremely taxing task. The exhaustion of mental energy was no less than fighting a battle with an expert of the same level. With Li Mu here, she didn't have to worry about court matters. Zhou Yi leaned against the dragon throne and closed her eyes to recover her mind. Suddenly, a cloud of fog appeared in front of her. When the fog dissipated, she was no longer in Jianghu Palace, but in the imperial garden. Zhou Yi quickly realized that this was a dream. As a 7th realm cultivator, she could control her body and consciousness. However, dreams didn't seem to have much to do with a person's consciousness. Instead, it was dominated by another consciousness. She wanted to withdraw her consciousness from the dream, but she heard a sound coming from the depths of the imperial garden. This made her change her mind. She was also interested in the contents of the subconscious fantasy. Thus, she walked along the path of the imperial garden and slowly walked into the depths. As she walked, the conversation in the depths of the garden gradually became clear. This orange is very sweet. It's a tribute orange from Jiangnan. Try it. I want you to feed me. Nonsense. You're not even willing to do this for me. You don't love me anymore. Okay. Open your mouth. In the depths of the garden, there seemed to be a couple passionately in love. Zhou Yi had never experienced love, so she didn't feel envious. She just felt that even the fragrance of the flowers in the imperial garden couldn't cover up the sour smell in the air. Just as she was about to leave, the couple sitting in the pavilion suddenly turned around. In the pavilion, the other her was peeling the orange with a smile and sending the orange pieces into the mouth of the person in her arms. And the person nestled in her arms was actually Jianghu Palace. Zhou Yi, who was lying on the rocking chair, suddenly opened her beautiful eyes. Fine sweat even seeped out of her forehead. After Li Mu finished reading the last memorial, he inadvertently glanced over and found that the Empress had woken up. Then he asked with some surprise, Your Majesty, are you very hot? Zhou Yi looked at Li Mu. The scene in her mind appeared again. She realized that her inner demon seemed to be getting more and more serious. Li Mu noticed the Empress's absent-mindedness. He waved his hand in front of her eyes and whispered, Your Majesty, Your Majesty. Zhou Yi came back to her senses and said, I'm fine. You can go back first. Li Mu said, The soup in the imperial kitchen is ready. I'll go get a bowl for you. Zhou Yi waved her hand and said, No need. I'll let Ali leave in a while. You can go back first. Li Mu tidied up the memorials he had read and put the chair back in place. He said, Then I'll go back first. Walking out of Changle Palace, he sighed softly. The reason he came to Changle Palace was that he didn't know how to face the situation at home. He wanted to sort out his thoughts first, but the Empress obviously didn't give him the chance. It was now lunchtime. In the Imperial Palace, the officials of the various government offices began to walk out in groups. An official looked at Li Mu walking out of Changle Palace and said with emotion, "What is a favored official? This is a favored official. The number of times he goes to Her Majesty's bedchamber is more than the number of times he goes to the Secretariat." Another official said, "What is he holding in his hand?" "It looks like a book." When his eyes swept over the book in Li Mu's hand, he inexplicably shivered. He crossed his arms and said, "It's cold. Tomorrow I'll have to wear more clothes." Li Mu walked out of the Imperial Palace and all the way back to the Li residence. He stood in front of the gate, but he didn't step in. It was hard for him to imagine what it would be like if Li Qing and Lu Hanyan appeared at home at the same time. In Lu Hanyan's eyes, Li Qing was undoubtedly Li Mu's ex-girlfriend. Although they had never confirmed their relationship, Li Mu couldn't deny that Li Qing was indeed his first love. If it wasn't for fate, the person sleeping next to him every night might be someone else. When a wife meets an ex-girlfriend and the current master of the Li residence meets an ex-master, it would be good if the two didn't fight. It couldn't be a happy and harmonious sisterly relationship, right? The gate of the residence suddenly opened. Xiao Bai ran out of the courtyard and asked in confusion, "Benefactor, what are you doing at the gate?" Li Mu rubbed her head, took a deep breath and stepped into the house. There wasn't the awkward atmosphere he imagined. Li Qing and Lu Hanyan were sitting in the courtyard and talking. They were neither too enthusiastic nor too distant. Li Mu walked into the courtyard and said, "I'm back." No one paid attention to him. Lu Hanyan looked at Li Qing and asked, "Where was Miss Li's previous room?" "I'll ask Wan Wan to help you tidy it up." Li Qing said, "No need, I'll tidy it up myself." Lu Hanyan shook her head and said, "This used to be your home and it will still be your home in the future. You don't have to be so polite in your own home." What Li Mu was worried about didn't happen. Lu Hanyan, who had always been stingy in relationships, was so magnanimous that he couldn't believe it. At night, when Li Mu was about to go to his room to sleep, the bedroom door slammed shut just as he reached the door. In the room, Lu Hanyan said gently, "From today onwards you'll sleep in the study." Her voice was very gentle, but the words she said were as cold as an iceberg. Late at night, on the small bed in the study, Li Mu hugged Xiao Bai and stroked her smooth fur. Only then did he feel some warmth in his heart. She was the only one who would stay by his side all this time, in a certain residence in Nanyuan. In a secret room, a soft conversation could be heard. Zhou Zhong has left Chengdu today and has been sent to the border counties. The two consecrators escorting him are our people. This person can't be left alive. He betrayed us and knows too many of our secrets. If he doesn't die, he'll always be a disaster. Don't worry, I've already made arrangements. He won't be able to reach the border counties. In a certain county in Great Zhou, under the night sky, a stream of light streaked across the sky and landed on a mountain. A consecrator looked at Zhou Zhong, who was standing at the bow of the flying boat, and said, "Come down." Zhou Zhong looked at the vast wilderness and asked, "My lords, are we going to sleep here tonight?" The consecrator said, "What? You're a criminal official. Do you want to stay in a high-class inn?" He looked at Zhou Zhong and couldn't help but ask, "Lord Zhou, you're a smart person. Why did you do such a stupid thing? Why did you give up your position as the Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Justice? Why did you choose to go to the north to die?" The other consecrator said impatiently, "Why are you talking nonsense with him? Just do it. We'll enjoy ourselves outside for a while before returning to Chengdu." Zhou Zhong looked at them and asked, "You want to kill me?" The consecrator said, "Lord Zhou, are you so naive as to think that you won't have to die if His Majesty shows mercy?" Zhou Zhong said calmly, "You're deceiving the emperor." The consecrator laughed coldly and said, "If we kill you, we'll burn you to ashes with the true Samadhi fire." Who would know? Anyway, you criminal officials will all die in the hands of ghosts and demons in the end. Zhou Zhong asked again, "You really want to kill me?" The consecrator extended his hand. A ball of blazing flame floated in his palm. He walked towards Zhou Zhong and said, "In your next life, be a smart person." Zhou Zhong looked at him and said softly, "Deceiving the emperor is a crime punishable by death." Poof! The flame in the consecrator's hand suddenly went out. It wasn't that he cancelled his spell. It was that his spell had no more mana to support it. The moment Zhou Zhong finished speaking, his head and body suddenly separated. The wound was as smooth as a cut. Blood splattered 3 feet high. With the death of his physical body, his nascent spirit left his body. His expression was full of fear. He subconsciously wanted to escape, but in his confusion and fear, he slowly dissipated. In the blink of an eye, a fifth-realm cultivator's physical body was destroyed and his soul dispersed. Seeing his comrade die in such a strange way, the other consecrator's face turned pale. He turned around and fled without hesitation. His body streaked across the sky like a stream of light and quickly disappeared into the night sky. On the mountaintop, Zhou Zhong said, "Come back." The consecrator who fled rolled back and appeared at his previous position. Zhou Zhong looked at him and asked, "You haven't finished your work. Where are you going?" Li Mu was certain of this. In Li Mu's mind, Zhou Zhong's of cultivation was a mystery. Of Zhou's also of Lord. If he had not secretly helped Mrs. Chu that time, Li Mu might have thought that he was just an ordinary cultivator in the Fate realm. According to the news sent back by the surviving consecrator, Zhou Zhong only said one sentence: "Deceiving the monarch according to the law should be executed." That consecrator Ma's body and head were separated from his body, and then his soul dispersed. This made Li Mu think of an unpopular cultivation school. Before the rise of Buddhism, there were all sorts of cultivation schools. There was the school of medicine, the school of military, the school of music, the school of legalism, and so on. These schools all had their own specialties. Later, when Buddhism prospered and gradually became the mainstream of cultivation, these smaller schools slowly became extinct. Of these schools, Li Mu had the deepest impression of the school of legalism. The cultivators of legalism did not cultivate abilities or Taoist techniques. Once they reached the peak of their cultivation, their words became law. Taoist techniques and abilities were useless before them. Even though this ability was not limitless, it still made Li Mu very envious. However, this was now the world of Buddhism. The cultivation methods of the school of legalism had long been extinct. Occasionally, a successor of the school of legalism would appear, but they were like a flash in the pan, quickly disappearing. From Zhou Zhong's actions and his identity, it was extremely likely that he cultivated the school of legalism. Throughout history, the successors of legalism would actively enter the court and push for legal reform. Perhaps their cultivation had something to do with this. The school of legalism did not cultivate dharmic powers. Their attacks were more like Taoist techniques. If Zhou Zhong cultivated both Taoist techniques and Taoist techniques, then his true strength might be extremely close to the sixth realm. If a fifth realm transcendent wanted to touch him, he would undoubtedly have kicked an iron plate. Through this incident, another problem was exposed. The Department of Worship was no longer the Department of Worship of Great Zhou, but the Department of Worship of the Old Party. The prefectures of Great Zhou had a high degree of autonomy. The Department of Worship's function was equivalent to the Great Zhou FBI. It specialized in dealing with matters that could not be dealt with locally. If it was controlled by someone, there would be very serious consequences. Xiao Yu's incident was one of them. Zhou Zhong's incident also explained the problem. Since they had decided to do something big, they might as well start with the Department of Worship. However, before that, there was an even more important matter that the Secretariat had to deal with immediately. After overturning the case for Li Qing's father, 2 ministers and 2 assistant ministers of the 6 ministries were removed from their positions. All of a sudden, there were 4 empty positions for officials above the 4th rank. The Ministry of Personnel was also without a leader. Without officials to replace them, the Yamen would not be able to continue operating. Regarding this, the Secretariat had been arguing for an entire morning. The Ministry of Personnel was the lifeblood of the Old Party. It was originally completely controlled by the Old Party. 1 minister and 2 assistant ministers were all members of the Old Party. The minister of the Ministry of Personnel was the Duke of Nanyang. Through the Ministry of Personnel, the Old Party controlled the assessment, appointment and dismissal of most officials in Great Zhou. They also indirectly influenced the Department of Worship. It could be said that they had grasped the lifeline of the imperial court. In the process of overturning the case for Li Yi, Li Mu and Zhou Zhong had cut off the lifeblood of the Old Party. It seemed that the Old Party had only lost 3 officials, but in reality they had suffered heavy losses. The Old Party was the upper echelons of the government and could influence countless lower echelons of the government. Without the Ministry of Personnel, the Old Party would lose half of their authority in the imperial court. Therefore they hated Zhou Zhong to the bone and wished that they could get rid of Zhou Zhong on the way to exile him. This time the position of the Minister of the Ministry of Personnel was contested by Xiao Ziyu, who represented the royal Xiao family, and Zhou Xiong, who represented the Zhou family, for the entire morning. They argued until their faces were red and their necks were thick, but no one gave in to the other. It was impossible for them to give in. In terms of power, the Minister of the Ministry of Personnel was the most powerful among the 6 ministers. The old party wanted to take back the position that originally belonged to them, and the new party would not let go of this one and only opportunity. If they obtained the Ministry of Personnel, they would be able to suppress the old party. Compared to them, the others did not speak much. This important position did not belong to the old party, but to the new party. It could not fall to anyone else. As for the Minister of the Ministry of Personnel, the Secretariat could submit 7 candidates. In order to ensure that nothing went wrong, the Xiao family wanted to monopolize the 7 positions. Naturally, the Zhou family also wanted to monopolize it. Neither side would let the other have their way. As the two argued back and forth, Li Mu felt a headache coming on. Why don't you take a look and see if the person you nominated has any qualifications? My person doesn't have any qualifications, but your person does? At most, I'll give you 1. 7 positions, not 1 less. This position originally belonged to us. Li Mu finally could not take it anymore. He slammed the table and said, "The 2 of you, that's enough." He looked at Zhou Xiong and Xiao Ziyu and said, "The 2 of you have argued for 4 hours over a single position. Do you still have any respect for your colleagues? There are still 2 assistant ministers and 1 minister to recommend. Are you going to discuss this until next year?" The other officials of the Secretariat agreed with Li Mu and spoke up. "Yes, Lord Li is right. If the 2 of you continue like this, when will it end? Let's discuss and come up with a plan." After some thought, Li Mu said, "How about this? Of the 7 positions, each of you can have 3. The last position can be left empty or someone else can be chosen." "No, I don't agree." The 2 of them refused without hesitation. Whether it was the new party or the old party, they were both determined to obtain the position of Minister of Personnel. They did not want to give up even 1 position, much less 3. "What right do you have to disagree?" Li Mu's face darkened as he said, "As officials of the Secretariat, are you more handsome than the other officials or have a higher cultivation? Why should the 2 of you decide on 7 positions? By allowing the 2 of you to discuss this, we are giving you face. If you don't want it, then we won't give it to you. For these 7 positions, the 6 officials of the Secretariat will each recommend 1 person, and the last one will be decided by Assistant Minister Liu. Are the 2 of you satisfied?" Zhou Xiong and Xiao Ziyu were speechless. The other 3 officials of the Secretariat felt extremely satisfied. Li Mu's words had spoken out what they had been thinking for many years. There were 6 Imperial Secretariat officials in the Central Secretariat. Everyone had the same rank and status. Due to the influence of the old and new factions, they usually gave these 2 people more power to speak. If they continued to push their luck, then they would be asking for more face. Which of the officials of the Secretariat did not come from an illustrious clan? They were not inferior to the Xiao clan or the Zhou clan. For thousands of years, the dynasties of this land had, at some point in time, shared the same surname as them. Who did not have some pride in their hearts? Not long after Li Mu's voice fell, Wang Shi of the Secretariat said, "I agree with what Sir Li said." Zhang Huili continuing to argue like this is not a solution. "If the 2 of you do not agree with Lord Li's initial proposal, then we will each nominate 1 person. Wouldn't this be fairer?" Song Liangyu looked at the 2 and asked, "Lord Xiao, Lord Zhou, what do you think?" Xiao Ziyu and Zhou Xiong thought quickly. The second situation was naturally the one they did not want to see the most. If each of them could only nominate 1 person, then there was not even a 20% chance. If each of them nominated 3 people, then the chance was close to 50%. They were clear about this. The 2 of them looked at each other and said at the same time, "Then let's follow Lord Li's initial proposal." The 2 of them each wrote 3 names on the paper. Xiao Ziyu asked, "The nomination of the last person. That is none of your business." Li Mu waved his hand and said, "Out of the 7 spots, the 2 of you have taken up 6. The 5 of us do not even have a chance to nominate 1 person?" Zhou Xiong and Xiao Ziyu did not speak. The last person to nominate was just to make up the numbers. As long as it was not someone from the opposing faction, they had no objections. Zhou Xiong was still worried and added, "The position of Minister of Personnel is very important. Zhang Chun does not have enough experience. If Lord Li wants to nominate him, I'm afraid it is against the rules. Do you think that I am like the two of you who only know how to suppress dissidents and appoint people based on favoritism? Li Mu looked at him with disdain and said, besides, even if it is a nomination, the final decision is made by His Majesty. Do you think that I can make the decision for the Minister of Personnel? Chapter 373. The position of Minister of Official Personnel Affairs was extremely important. Even if Li Mu was a favored official, the Empress would not let him make the decision. However, Xiao Ziyu was still worried. He asked, if I may ask, who would you like to nominate? Li Mu actually wanted to nominate Zhang Chun. After all, he owed old Zhang a lot of favors. If he became Minister of Official Personnel Affairs, he would have the right to apply for a 5-sectioned house from the imperial court. He would have servants and maids. However, the Minister of Official Personnel Affairs was a 3rd-rank official. He was now a 5th-rank official. No matter how he skipped a rank, he could not let the Shindu medallion directly promote him to Minister of Official Personnel Affairs. If it was not Zhang Chun, it did not matter who else was. Li Mu thought for a while and said, Lu Qing, the Assistant Minister of Rights. It was sad to say that after being in the imperial court for so long, others had formed cliques and cliques, but he did not even have anyone to do so. In fact, when it came to nominating for the position of Minister of Official Personnel Affairs, he could only think of Lu Qing, the Assistant Minister of Rights. Xiao Ziyu looked at Li Mu in surprise and said, the Assistant Minister of Rights has just been promoted. Isn't it too frequent to promote him to Minister of Official Personnel Affairs in such a short period of time? Li Mu looked at him and said, why don't we give this opportunity to Lord Xiao? Before Xiao Ziyu could answer, Zhou Xiong immediately said, Lu Qing is Lu Qing then. He's currently at rank 4. It's fine as long as he has the qualifications to be nominated for rank 3. You're meddling too much, aren't you? Lu Qing had just been promoted to Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Rights not long ago. In principle, it was impossible for him to be promoted to Minister of the Ministry of Personnel in the near future. In this way, the uncertainty of the last position could be eliminated. Wasn't nominating Lu Qing much better than Li Muzhen nominating a capable and experienced official? Although Zhou Xiong did not like Li Mu, he would not blindly oppose him at a time like this. Li Mu looked at the other 3 officials of the Secretariat and asked, I am just randomly nominating someone. Do the other 3 have any thoughts? The other 3 secretaries shook their heads in unison. Wang Shi said, let's listen to Sir Li. Both the new and old parties were determined to win the position of Minister of Personnel. It was useless for them to nominate him. Li Mu and Lu Qing were neither relatives nor friends. Nominating him was just to make up the numbers. Since it was just to make up the numbers, it didn't matter who made up the numbers. Under Li Mu's forceful intervention, Zhou Xiong and Xiao Ziyu made a compromise, and the candidate for the Minister of Personnel was finally decided. Zhang Huili said, next it's the 2 assistant ministers' turn. Xiao Ziyu quickly added, it's best if the position of Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Personnel is taken up by an official familiar with the Ministry of Personnel's affairs. It's more than suitable for the position to be replaced by 2 ministers of the Ministry of Personnel. There's nothing else to discuss. The other 3 officials from the Secretariat still did not express any opinions. In the past few years, the old party had already built the Ministry of Personnel into an iron bucket that was impenetrable. The 2 directors of the Ministry of Personnel were also officials from the old party through and through. They would not easily let others interfere. Li Mu looked at Xiao Ziyu and said indifferently, in my opinion, we should ask His Majesty to reduce the number of officials in the Secretariat. Xiao Ziyu did not know why Li Mu suddenly brought up this matter. He asked, why? Li Mu said, because Lord Xiao alone is enough for the Secretariat. You alone can make the decision for the important matters that require 6 Secretariat secretaries to discuss. The few of us are paid by the imperial court, but we don't do anything for the court. We really feel guilty. Xiao Ziyu's face turned red. Li Mu was blatantly saying that he acted arbitrarily. Zhou Xiong was somewhat gloating. He said, Lord Xiao is too domineering. Why don't you just decide on His Majesty's behalf who will take these 2 positions? Xiao Ziyu's face darkened. Then what do you think we should do? Zhou Xiong said, it's very simple. The 6 of us will each nominate 1 person. The last person will be decided by Assistant Minister Lu or Lord Head of the Secretariat. In any case, the new party would not be able to get either of the 2 assistant minister positions in the Ministry of Personnel. He did not mind muddying the waters so that the old party would not be able to get them either. Zhou Xiong's words pushed him to the opposite side of everyone. Xiao Ziyu was silent for a moment. He could only say, "That's fair. Let's do it this way." It was rare that the 2 assistant minister positions in the Ministry of Personnel were decided by the 7 of them. The positions of Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Justice and Minister of Works were also contested by 2 people who represented the interests of the old and new parties. Under Li Mu's efforts, a few other people also received a few nominations. The other 3 officials of the Secretariat finally felt a sense of participation. This was actually the norm in the Secretariat. The reason there were 6 officials of the Secretariat was not only because they corresponded to the 6 ministries, but also because these 6 people belonged to different factions. This was to prevent one party or one faction from having too much say in important matters of the court. In the past few years, the court officials had taken sides, forming the old and new parties. They each occupied the court, and the structure of the Secretariat was also affected. It was practically Zhou Xiong and Xiao Ziyu's opinions. This situation finally changed after Li Mu came to the Secretariat. Under the protection of Her Majesty, the old and new parties could not do anything to him. After the 6 officials of the Secretariat decided on the candidates for the positions, they handed them over to the Assistant Minister of the Secretariat and the head of the Secretariat. If the officials of the Secretariat had no objections, they would send them to the Ministry of Martial Arts. After the Ministry of Martial Arts verified the candidates, they would hand them over to the Empress to decide on the final candidates. Among them, there were restrictions on the monarch's authority and also restrictions on the monarch's authority. For officials of this level, even the Empress could only choose from the people appointed by the Secretariat. The Secretariat only had the right to recommend but not the right to decide. Of course, the past emperors all had their own trusted aides in the Secretariat. This way many things were still decided by the monarch. Li Mu tidied up the memorials and sent them to Jianghu Palace. He placed them on the table in front of Zhou Yi and said, "Your Majesty, these are the candidates for the Minister of Personnel, the Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Justice and the Minister of Works. The Secretariat has already chosen them. Please take a look." Zhou Yi flipped through the memorials on the top, picked up the red brush and asked, "Who do you think is qualified for the position of Minister of Personnel?" Li Mu said, "This is a matter of great importance. Your subject does not dare to speak carelessly." Zhou Yi thought for a moment and was about to circle a name when Li Mu coughed softly. Zhou Yi paused. The tip of the brush brushed past that name and stopped above another name. Li Mu coughed again. The tip of the brush continued to slide down. Cough, cough, cough. After several coughs, when the tip of Zhou Yi's brush stopped at the last name, Li Mu finally stopped coughing. Zhou Yi circled the 2 words Lu Qing. Li Mu smiled and said, "Your Majesty is wise. Although Lu Qing's qualifications are somewhat lacking, he does not form cliques and does not pursue personal interests. This can prevent one clique from controlling the court through the Ministry of Personnel and causing chaos in the court." After Zhou Yi circled Lu Qing's name, he handed the brush to Li Mu and said, "You can choose the rest." Li Mu took a step back and said, "Your Majesty, you cannot do this. If others know, they will think that your subject is taking advantage of your favor and interfering in the government. Your Majesty should choose." Zhou Yi glanced at him and said, "You are one of my people. Your thoughts are my thoughts. Tell me what you think." Li Mu no longer hid anything. He walked to her side and said, "Your subject knows that your Majesty does not want to be emperor and does not want to be trapped in the imperial palace. However, your subject believes that if your Majesty wants to leave the court, the first thing your Majesty should do is take control of the court. For these important positions, your Majesty should consider placing officials loyal to your Majesty and not officials from the old or new cliques." Zhou Yi said lightly, "Right now, I feel that there is nothing bad about being emperor." Li Mu lowered his head and glanced at her. Right now, she felt that being emperor was not bad because he had helped her do the things that an emperor should do. He had also helped her worry about the things that an emperor should worry about. Apart from showing her face at the morning court every 3 days, had she ever fulfilled any of the duties an emperor should have? Li Mu dared to complain about this in his heart. If he said it out loud, the empress might come to find him in his dreams tonight. Li Mu cleared his throat and said, "As for these candidates, I can give your Majesty some suggestions. The Minister of Personnel is Lu Qing. As for the 2 assistant ministers, one can be given to the Wang family. As for the other, I recommend Zhang Chun. Sir Zhang has always kept himself clean and has never been associated with the old or new cliques. As long as your majesty gives him a house with 5 courtyards and a few maids, he will work for your majesty. As for the assistant minister of justice, I recommend the former minister of justice, Yang Lin. Although he seems to be from the old clique, there is still room to rope him in. Letting him be the assistant minister of justice can also appease the old clique and lessen their unbalanced mentality of losing the ministry of personnel. Finally, the minister of works. Although this position is not as important as the minister of personnel, it is best to have it in the hands of one of our own. For this position, I recommend the North County Governor, Chen Jingyuan. After Zhou Zhong's matter, the 6 important positions were empty. This affected the hearts of countless people in the imperial court. To quickly calm the hearts of the people, the Secretariat immediately recommended a batch of officials to become the candidates for those important positions. Amongst them, who the 3 officials of the Ministry of Personnel would end up in was something that both the old and new cliques cared about. The final result would affect which party would control the Ministry of Personnel in the future and influence the imperial court to the greatest extent. The Secretariat did not have to wait for long before the Jianghu Palace had a result. The current Assistant Minister of Rights, Lu Qing, was moved to the Minister of Personnel. Zhang Chun, Imperial Clan Temple Governor, was moved to the left Assistant Minister of Personnel. At the same time, he held the positions of Imperial Clan Temple Governor and Imperial Clan Temple Governor. Wang Xing was moved to the Ministry of Personnel as the right Assistant Minister. The Minister of Justice, Yang Lin, was promoted to Assistant Minister of Justice. The person who was chosen to be the Minister of Works was even more surprising. It was the North County Governor, Chen Jingyuan. Very few people in the imperial court knew this name. Apart from the selection of the Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Justice as expected, the final selection of the other important ministers were all shocking. The Secretariat. Looking at the name list that returned from Jianghu Palace, the names behind the few important positions were actually the officials that Li Mu used to make up the numbers. Xiao Ziyu and Zhou Xiong reacted at the same time. Not good. We fell into a trap again. Among the 6 ministries, the Ministry of Works had the least power. Thus, whether it was Zhou Ting's resignation as assistant minister or Zhou Chuan's dismissal, it didn't affect the Zhou family too much. The Xiao clan, on the other hand, had lost the Ministry of Personnel. Their lifeline had been cut off. However, this was not entirely good news for the Zhou family. In the past, the Empress didn't care much about the fight between the old party and the new party, and she wouldn't intervene. But now she was deliberately suppressing the new party and the old party. This time she appointed several important official positions, avoiding the officials of the new party and the old party. She intended to cultivate her own forces, which was more significant than suppressing the other 2 parties. Could it be that she's really cultivating her own forces? Zhou Chuan's face was full of doubt. He asked, in the past she only wanted to condense the next strand of Emperor's qi as soon as possible and pass down the throne. She didn't care much about the fight between the 2 parties. Could it be that her thinking has changed? Zhou Ting said indifferently, it's very possible. Ever since she began to favor Li Mu, she's changed more and more. Zhou Xiong said with incomparable certainty, I'm very sure that Li Mu must be behind Her Majesty's actions. This time, from the beginning to the end, was a trap set by him. I suspect that he wants to support his own party. No matter what, Li Mu must be taken seriously. The Ministry of Rights. In the assistant minister's office, Lu Qing was packing his things. From tomorrow onwards, he would take up his post at the Ministry of Personnel as Minister of Personnel. The Minister of Rights walked into the office and clasped his hands in greeting. Congratulations, Lord Lu. Lord Lu's promotion speed is really fast. Rather complicated emotions flowed in the depths of his eyes. In the short span of half a year, he had personally witnessed Lu Qing rise from a small minister-counselor of the Ministry of Rights to a physician, assistant minister, and now, Lu Qing had become the Minister of Personnel. He held real power in his hands and his status was firmly above his own. As Lu Qing's superior, he had mixed feelings. Lu Qing also sighed emotionally. Yes, I also didn't expect this place to rise so quickly. Northern Court. Li Mu stood at the entrance of his house, watching Zhang Chun move in. This time, not only had old Zhang been promoted, his residence had also been changed from 3 entrances to 4 entrances. In addition, the Empress had also rewarded his family with 2 servant girls and 2 servants. The distance between the Zhang residence and the Li residence had also become closer. At the housewarming banquet, he patted Li Mu on the shoulder and said, Between us, there's no need to say anything unnecessary. Come, let's drink this cup. There weren't many people at the banquet. Chapter 375. Li Mu had already prepared to return to his room to sleep. When he heard Lu Hanyan's words, he suddenly quivered and hurriedly said, "What are you talking about?" Lu Hanyan glanced at him and said, "Men shouldn't interrupt when women are talking." A trace of nervousness and panic flashed in the depths of Li Qing's eyes. However, after she met Lu Hanyan's gaze, that trace of panic gradually turned into calmness and indifference. She remembered what Li Si said before she left Yangqiu County. Li Si said that in terms of relationships, it was always easier to take a step back than to take a step forward. If she took a step back now and regretted it in the future, she would have to take more than one step forward. By the time she regretted it, someone would have already walked in front of her. In fact, she regretted it, but it was already too late because someone had already walked in front of her. Li Qing looked at Lu Hanyan and said calmly, "Yes, I have liked him since a long time ago. However, senior sister, don't worry. I won't fight with you for anything. I will leave tomorrow morning." She wanted to deny it against her will, but if she denied it this time, she would never have the chance to say it again. Li Mu looked at Li Qing with an indescribable feeling in his heart. Lu Hanyan sighed softly and said, "Actually, the one who should leave is me. This is your home. The person he liked in the beginning was also you. I just took advantage of the situation." Li Qing shook her head and said, "This is my own choice. I should also bear the consequences. The person who has always been by his side is you. This is no longer my home. Its owner is you. I hope that the two of you can be united and grow old together." Lu Hanyan asked, "What about you?" Li Qing thought for a moment and said, "I will stay in Baiyin Mountain and repay the sect's kindness." Lu Hanyan was silent for a moment and said, "The one you should repay the most is not the sect, but a certain someone." Li Mu looked at Lu Hanyan. For a moment he couldn't figure out her routine. Li Qing nodded and said, "If you need me to do anything, I won't refuse." Lu Hanyan looked at her and said, "Then give yourself to me." Li Qing looked at her with a stunned expression. Li Mu looked at her dumbfounded. Li Qing came back to her senses and said in disbelief, "You, what are you talking about?" Lu Hanyan's expression was melancholy, and her tone was somewhat helpless. She continued, "Although I don't want to share my husband with others, it's not that I can't accept it if that person is you. After all, you're in front of me. A man can't forget the first woman he likes in his entire life. While he's with other women, he still has to think about an outsider. Why not let him think about his own sisters? You're not the first and you're not the only one." Li Qing's lips moved. Her thoughts were in a mess. Lu Hanyan looked at Li Qing and said, "Of course you can also refuse." It doesn't matter if she has one more. If it was someone else, she could forget about marrying into the Li family. But she is Li Qing. She buried her head in Li Mu's chest and said, "Let me tell you, I have already married Li Qing for you. You can't abandon me for any reason in the future, any?" As she spoke, her voice became softer. The calmness and confidence she had when facing Li Qing just now had disappeared. Li Mu's clothes were wet from her tears. At this moment, Li Mu finally understood what she had been worried about these days. The experience of being abandoned by her parents when she was young had caused her trauma. Even now it had not healed. Li Mu hugged her tightly and said seriously, "I will never abandon you, never." Jianghu Palace. Zhou read several memorials. Suddenly she raised her head and asked, "Where is Li Mu? Didn't he go to the minister's department today? I didn't see him in the morning court." Mr. May said, "I really didn't see him today." Zhou thought for a while and put down her brush. She said, "He didn't go to court for no reason. I want to see what he is doing." She flicked her finger and a picture appeared in front of her. In the picture it seemed to be a street in Shindu. The street was full of people. There was a beautiful woman on each side of Li Mu. He was holding the woman on the left and the woman on the right. Mr. May looked at the picture in front of him and said in surprise, "Isn't that woman Li Yi's daughter?" "He and Li Mu," Zhou snorted and said, "I knew it. Their relationship is not that simple. He goes to Zongjing Temple every day more frequently than he comes to Jianghu Palace. He didn't want the palace maids I gave him before. I thought he didn't like women. Now it seems that all men in the world are the same," Mr. May said awkwardly. "He is so outstanding. Naturally there are more people who like him. It's understandable that both parties are willing." Zhou Yi waved her hand to disperse the picture. She was a little annoyed. Li Mu had another wife. This meant that he would come to Chang'e Palace less often. It was only the first day and he didn't even go to court. On the streets of Chengdu the people looked at the three figures in front of them and whispered. Isn't that Li Yi? Who is he with? The one on Li Yi's left is Madame Li. The one on the right seems to be Li Yi's daughter. Why is Li Yi holding her hand? Is there a need to ask? Li Yi overturned the case for Li Yi and saved Miss Li from prison. She was touched and wanted to marry him. It's normal. This is also a good story. It can be written into a play. They are a perfect match. No wonder Li Yi said he wouldn't let Li Yi have no descendants. So this is what he meant. Now Li Yi really has a descendant. The Ministry of Justice should deal with it as soon as possible. The Central Secretariat had to do with national policies or important decisions. They needed to be reviewed by the Minister of Ceremonies and the Minister of Ceremonies to guide the 6 ministries in their implementation. For such small matters, the Central Secretariat officials had the power to directly order the Ministry of Justice. Yang Lin took the document. After reading it, he said in shock, "This is the Ministry of Personnel's physician, Lord Wang Luan." Li Mu looked at him and asked, "Why? Does the Ministry of Justice's handling of cases vary from person to person?" Yang Lin quickly replied, "Of course not." Li Mu said, "I believe that Lord Yang will be a good official. Otherwise, I wouldn't have urged His Majesty to let you be the Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Justice." Yang Lin was stunned. He had thought that his appointment as the Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Justice was due to the efforts of the old faction. He was still puzzled as to why the old faction did not get a single official position in the Ministry of Personnel, but he succeeded in the Ministry of Justice. Only now did he know that his promotion was not because of the old faction but because of Li Mu. He immediately clasped his hands and said, "Thank you, Lord Li." Li Mu waved his hand and said, "No need to thank me. His Majesty felt that Lord Yang was not too far off the path and wanted to give you a chance." Yang Lin stood where he was. His gaze gradually became hesitant. He knew that at this moment he was faced with an important choice in his life. Should he continue to work for the old faction, or should he completely side with Li Mu? The old faction was controlled by the Shao clan, and the Shao clan was the legitimate royal family of Great Zhou. Even though the Zhou clan was extremely powerful, they were not the legitimate royal family. Many officials in the court and the people of Great Zhou were inclined towards the empress returning the throne to the Zhou clan. Therefore, even though the old faction had been suppressed by the new faction in recent years, they were still powerful and did not lack supporters. He worked for the old faction because he believed that the Shao clan would regain power sooner or later. However, what reason did he have to work for Li Mu? His Majesty could not pass the throne to Li Mu or Li Mu's children. Yang Lin did not dare to make a rash decision when it concerned his future and even his life. He looked at Li Mu and probed, "Lord Li, may I ask if His Majesty intends to pass the throne to the Zhou clan in the future?" Li Mu glanced at him and asked, "Is this something that you and I, as subjects, can discuss?" Yang Lin looked troubled. Li Mu knew what he was worried about. He said, "Are you afraid that the Shao clan will come after you if His Majesty passes the throne to the Shao clan?" Yang Lin said, "Lord Li, I have elders and children to take care of. I cannot afford to gamble. If I gamble wrongly, the lives of my family." Li Mu asked, "When do you think His Majesty will pass the throne to the Shao clan?" Yang Lin shook his head and said, "I don't know." Li Mu said slowly, "His Majesty is a powerhouse of the 7th realm. He can live for at least 3 decades. She is in her prime now. Even if the throne is to be passed, it will be decades or even centuries later. Do you think you can live until then?" Yang Lin thought for a moment and felt that Li Mu's words seemed to make sense. By that time he would have retired and returned to his hometown to enjoy the rest of his life. It would have nothing to do with him who would inherit the throne. However, he still did not dare to gamble. He asked Li Mu nervously, "His Majesty won't pass the throne early, right?" Li Mu glanced at him and said, "Do you think His Majesty will suddenly pass the throne?" Yang Lin looked at Li Mu in a daze, seeming to understand something. If it was said that His Majesty had such thoughts in the past, he would not find it strange. In the past, His Majesty did not care about the court at all. He did not care about the struggles between the old and new parties. He let nature take its course. However, the appointments of the officials from the Ministry of Personnel and the Ministry of Justice showed that His Majesty was already deliberately suppressing the old and new parties and taking back power. Could it be that His Majesty had other thoughts? Li Mu looked at him and said, I know that it is very difficult for Lord Yang to make a decision. I will give you 3 days to think about it. After 3 days, whether we are friends or enemies will depend on your choice. Yang Lin's expression was bitter. Did he have any other choice? Although Li Mu did not have many friends in the court, he was really good to his friends. In just half a year, Zhang Chun had been promoted from the Divine Capital Commandant to the Left Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Personnel. He was a real minister with real power. The residence he lived in also went from 2, 3 and now 4. He was about to live in a large residence with 5 entrances. For Yang Lin, who lived in a small house with 2 entrances for 3 generations, a residence with 5 entrances was an unattainable dream. On the other hand, Li Mu's enemies were either dead or demoted. Those who were lucky enough to survive lost their positions and reputation. Yang Lin did not doubt that if he became Li Mu's enemy, he would not even be able to live in a small house with 2 entrances in less than a month. The prison of the Ministry of Justice was perhaps the best outcome. If it was a little worse, he might only have a few coffin planks to block the dirt. After careful consideration, Yang Lin let out a long sigh. Then, his expression gradually turned solemn. His family spent a lot of money to hire manager Wei to defend him. Guess what happened? What happened? He was just executed yesterday. In a room on duty in the Ministry of Justice, Wei Peng was writing a file. Yang Lin stood in front of the table and asked, You have a grudge with Wang Luan's son, right? Wei Peng nodded and said, We had a conflict before. Yang Lin said, Be careful in the future. It's best not to bring personal grudges into official matters. Wei Peng said, This official understands. Yang Lin shook his head and left. Because of the delay just now, the brush in Wei Peng's hand had been suspended in the air for too long. A drop of ink fell onto the half-finished file and quickly dyed it red, leaving behind a blob of ink. Wei Peng looked at the blob of ink and said in a low voice, Come back. The blob of ink on the file quickly shrank and formed a blob of ink. It floated in the air and landed back on the brush. The paper was as clean as new. Compared to the demotion of the Minister of Personnel and the left and right assistant ministers, the imprisonment of a mere director of the Ministry of Personnel did not attract much attention. However, to the officials of the old party, this matter was worth paying attention to. Times had changed. In the past, they were in charge of the Ministry of Personnel. However, the director of the Ministry of Personnel was now the highest-ranking official in the Ministry of Personnel. Losing one of the 2 directors of the Ministry of Personnel was a great loss to them. In a certain residence in the southern courtyard, a secret meeting was taking place. Why did something suddenly happen to Wang Luan? I've asked Yang Lin. He's under the orders of the Secretariat. It should be Li Mu who's behind this. Wang Luan once received my order to persuade the imperial court to execute Li Mu's daughter. Now, I heard that Li Yi's daughter is living in Li Mu's house and is very close to him. Perhaps she has already become his woman. He's taking revenge. After a long silence, someone sighed and said in an unwilling tone, In my opinion, we shouldn't provoke Li Mu for the time being. He has the Emperor's protection and doesn't reveal any flaws. We can't do anything to him and there's no need to fight to the death with him. Don't forget that we only have one opponent. As long as we defeat the Zhou family, no one will be a threat to us. Someone sighed and said, Now, I'm afraid it's not about whether we should provoke Li Mu or not, but whether he should provoke us. If Li Yi's daughter is already his woman, then Li Yi is his father-in-law. It's very likely that he wants to avenge Li Yi. Hasn't he already overturned the verdict for Li Yi? Overturning the verdict is not revenge. Judging from Wang Luan's case, this person will seek revenge for the smallest grievance. Chapter 378. Li Qing went back to her room alone to calm down. Lu Hanyin had a gloating expression on her face. Li Mu smacked her butt and said, You did it on purpose, didn't you? Lu Hanyin smiled and said, I just wanted her to experience my feelings. Besides, she will find out sooner or later. If I don't tell her, will you tell her yourself? The eldest madam of the Li family did it for revenge. Because of Li Qing, she had cried a lot in the past. Li Qing had wronged her, so she wanted to use Wanwan and Xiaobai to take revenge. She was still the petty Lu Hanyan. But she was also the Lu Hanyan that Li Mu liked. For many things, it was more appropriate for her to speak to Li Qing than Li Mu. After thinking this through, Li Mu put his arm around her and rubbed the place where he had just hit her. He said, "Does it hurt?" Lu Hanyan blushed and slapped his hand away. She said, "Behave yourself. Wanwan and Xiaobai are still over there." Li Mu looked over. The two girls who were sitting together on the swing immediately covered their faces with their hands. Their eyes peeked through the gaps between their fingers. Li Mu moved his hand away and said angrily, "Children shouldn't poke their noses into adult affairs. I'm not a child anymore. I'm not a child anymore." Wanwan and Xiaobai tried to defend themselves. Li Mu waved his hand and said, Go back to your room to play." Although they were not young in some areas, they were still under 18 years old. As long as they were not over 18 years old in Li Mu's eyes, they were different from Lu Hanyan and Li Qing. Li Mu could hold Xiaobai's original body, but as long as she transformed, he would feel guilty. Wanwan was the same. She had not changed much in the past 2 years. She was still greedy and playful. The only change was that her eyes were more seductive. As long as one looked into her eyes, one's soul would be sucked in. Little White and Wanwan were soul seducers and soul catchers respectively. When the two beauties worked together, even Li Mu could not withstand them sometimes. Li Qing was alone in the room. Lu Hanyan was full of satisfaction after getting her revenge. She went to the great music bar to find her friends. She planned to buy the whole place and was discussing the price with the owner. Li Mu had nothing to do, so he watched Wanwan and Xiaobai play aeroplane chess in the courtyard. Before the game, they had agreed that the loser would have to warm the bed next time Li Mu slept in the study. Li Mu watched for almost an hour. They were still playing aeroplane chess. While he was bored to death, something in the space of the flask heaven suddenly moved. Li Mu stretched out his hand, and the spiritual snail appeared in his hand. "Come to the Jianghu palace." Only this sentence came from the spiritual snail, and then there was no more sound. In the past few days he couldn't even take care of his family. Chapter 379. Boom. The two explosive talismans pasted on the gates of the Gao mansion exploded under the control of his transcendence energy. With a loud bang, the two gates of the Gao mansion collapsed. The gatekeeper of the Gao mansion stood in the courtyard and stared at the collapsed gates in a daze. His mind was blank. His master was a respected figure in the fairies' capital. Even if he was no longer the assistant minister of the Ministry of Personnel, he was still the elder brother of concubine Gao, a relative of the royal family. Who would be so bold as to blow up the gates of the Gao mansion? Zhang Chun stood outside the gate and waved at the officials of the imperial clan temple. "Follow me in and arrest the guilty official." The loud noise at the gates had already alerted the people of the Gao mansion. In a split second, more than 10 maids and servants rushed out from various places. As soon as they arrived at the front courtyard, they saw the collapsed gates of the Gao mansion. The former right assistant minister of the Ministry of Personnel, Gao Hong, rushed out of the inner court. Seeing that the main gate of his residence had been blasted open, he was enraged. He glared at Zhang Chun, his eyes almost popping out of their sockets as he snapped, "Zhang, what are you doing?" Gao Hong hated Zhang Chun to the core. Not only because Zhang Chun took his position as the assistant minister of the Ministry of Personnel, but also because Zhang Chun was Li Mu's #1 lackey. If you hated someone, you would naturally hate everything about that person, including his lackeys. Zhang Chun looked at Gao Hong and said calmly, "There is a case that requires you to go to the Imperial Clan Temple. However, your gatekeeper refused to cooperate, so I can only take forceful measures." The gatekeeper of the Gao mansion hid in a corner, trembling and not daring to raise his head. Gao Hong held back his anger and asked, "What case?" Zhang Chun said, "You'll know when you get there." Gao Hong said coldly, "No matter what, I'm still the royal uncle. You don't have the right to summon me. If you want to summon me, show me the official seal of the Imperial Clan Temple." Zhang Chun looked at a minor official of the Imperial Clan Temple and asked, "Is there such a thing?" The minor official nodded and said, "Lord Gao's sister is the son of the former emperor's concubine, Concubine Gao of the Western Palace. To summon a member of the royal family or a relative of the emperor, you need the seal of the Imperial Clan Temple Master. Indeed, Lord Gao does not have this authority. Zhang Chun looked at Gao Hong and said, "You want the abbot's seal, right? Wait a moment. I'll be right back." Gao Hong's face darkened as he watched Zhang Chun leave with his men. Since Zhang Chun dared to come knocking on his door, he must have gotten hold of something that could be used against him. He couldn't figure it out at the moment. As he walked out of the main gate of the Gao mansion, Zhang Chun looked back and said, "Before I return, you are not allowed to go anywhere. If you leave the Gao mansion by 10 feet, you will be considered a fugitive. The Imperial Clan Court can arrest you or execute you." Gao Hong's face darkened, but he still retracted his foot. He walked back to the Gao mansion and said to a servant, "Go to the royal prince's mansion of Nanyang and inform the royal prince of this." On the way back to the Zongjing temple, Zhang Chun muttered, "The Gao manor doesn't look small. There should be 5 entrances, right?" A minor official beside him said, "The Gao residence is a standard 7-section mansion." 7? Zhang Chun thought about how his mansion only had 4 entrances, and there were only 2 maids and 2 servants. Just now in the Gao residence, there were almost 20 maids and servants who rushed out in an instant. Zhang Chun's heart was filled with envy. At this moment, the minor official continued, "That's nothing. The royal prince of Nanyang's mansion is the bigger one. It has 10 entrances and 10 entrances. He has 13 wives and concubines, and each of them has their own independent courtyard. Each of them has a senior maid and 4 junior maids. There are artificial mountains, ponds, and beautiful pavilions in the mansion." Zhang Chun thought about his dream of living in a 5-section mansion before he retired. He shook his head and said, "The layout is too small." The group walked through the palace gates and returned to the Zongjing temple. They didn't know that the imperial court was in an uproar. The number of officials in the imperial court was mysteriously reduced by more than 20. The morning court could no longer be held. Some officials even guessed that the powerhouses of the demon sect had sneaked into the fairies' capital and killed these officials to create chaos in the imperial court. After that, Mr. May clarified that the demon sect had nothing to do with this. Last night, it was the Zongjing Temple's deputy minister, Zhang Chun, who led the Zongjing Temple's people to arrest the guilty officials. He told the officials not to worry. It would have been better if Mr. May didn't clarify. After he did, the officials became even more worried. What? These officials were all arrested? More than 20 people were all arrested and sent to the Zongjing Temple? What's going on? Are we in trouble too? 20 officials of the imperial court had been arrested in one night. Without knowing the reason, all the officials in the Great Hall felt threatened, especially those who were close to these 2. They were even more frightened. At some point, an official seemed to realize something. He mumbled, these people are all accomplices in Li Yi's case." His words woke everyone up. The officials counted the people who were absent today and were shocked to find that all of them were related to Li Yi's case. The left servant said in a low voice, "What crime did the minister-counselor of the Ministry of Revenue Ai Tong commit that you want to arrest him?" Zhang Chun said, "The minister-counselor of the Ministry of Revenue Ai Tong took advantage of his position to embezzle taxes from the imperial treasury. What's wrong with me arresting him?" The left servant was shocked. He asked, "Do you have evidence?" Zhang Chun said, "The evidence is conclusive." The left servant said, "Minister of Imperial Treasury Wu Xing." Zhang Chun said, "Minister of Imperial Treasury Wu Xing used his power to threaten and sleep with young girls. The youngest of those girls was only 8 years old. Shouldn't he be arrested?" The left servant moved his lips and said, "Then the Minister of Imperial Treasury Qin Guang," Zhang Chun continued, "the Minister of Imperial Treasury Qin Guang allowed his younger brother to commit crimes and invade private residences. He bribed the Ministry of Justice to get his younger brother released and exonerated, breaking the law. What's wrong with me arresting him?" He looked at the left servant and said loudly, "There's also Wei Chong from the Taichung Temple, Wang Ning from the Taichung Temple, and Zhuxian from the Ceremonies Department. As officials of the Great Zhou, these people acted as a protective umbrella for criminals who trafficked women and children. Shouldn't they be arrested?" He listed the crimes of these more than 20 people one by one. The officials in the court were shocked. They had never heard of such things before. Since Zhang Chun dared to arrest them, then the Imperial Clan Temple might really have evidence of the crimes of so many officials. But how did they find out about these hidden things? Among the officials, some of them realized something. They lowered their heads and squeezed out 2 words from between their teeth, "Zhou Zhong,"